Most of the people in the fraternity were Sloane's loyal lackeys. It wasn't like Cross hadn't brought it up before, but nobody believed it, or rather, they chose not to. But now that Firefox had been caught, and without the fraternity's interference, Cross had enough time to explain the truth. Firefox's big, charming eyes were full of disbelief. "That's impossible." Luke chuckled. "No, he's telling the truth." Firefox turned around and looked at Luke, a conflicted expression on her face. She didn't want to believe it because she had always thought that she was doing the right thing. If she was only doing something bad for Sloane, that went against her initial reason for joining the fraternity. Few people in the world kept to their true intentions, but Luke knew that Firefox was one of them. He took out a titanium phone and played a video. It was a video of Sloane at work. On the screen, Sloane was taking a call and writing in a notebook. He was clearly taking down whatever was being said on the other end of the line. Luke then switched to another video. At that moment, there were several pieces of cloth in front of Sloane. He then wrote names under each piece of cloth based on what was in the notebook. Firefox was devastated. However, Cross murmured in a low voice, "So, he really does tamper with the list." Other people might not notice anything wrong with the video. But Cross and Firefox were both old hands and were very familiar with the procedure, and could easily see that something wasn't right. It was said that the cloth from the loom contained the name of an evil person who needed to be eliminated. Logically speaking, Sloane should be using a special decoding program to decipher the names as he held each piece of cloth. But from the video, he was copying the names from the notebook under the cloth pieces. The difference was like between a student figuring out the answer step by step after reading the question and writing the answer before even reading the question. Sloane was faking the list. Recalling what Cross had said, Firefox's eyes instantly dimmed, like those of a dying man. Luke put his phone away and said, "Don't take it to heart too much. I've been watching the fraternity for a long time. The mission targets you. Cross and Redback Dot were indeed criminals." Firefox was confused. "What?" Cross turned his head. Luke said, "You didn't kill the wrong people. Sloane didn't dare have you kill innocent people because he was afraid that you would notice something wasn't right, and only told you to kill the bad guys who committed heinous crimes. You don't have to blame yourself." After some simple words of comfort, he looked at the corner Cross was skulking in. "I helped you today. In return, I want you to take your son and this big sister of his out of New York for a while." Cross hesitated before he said, "I think." "No, don't." Luke cut him off bluntly. "To tell you the truth, I've been watching the fraternity for a long time. Naturally, someone will deal with the assassins who willfully kill the innocent. If anyone escapes the net, you can kill them, but for now, all of you stay away." The other three people in the room were stupefied, feeling like they had run into a lunatic. Even if the fraternity was in a mess at the moment, it still had over 10 elite assassins and hundreds of regular ones. No matter how much confidence Cross had in himself, he was still prepared to take a few years to gradually wear the fraternity down. He had never considered taking all of them down in one go. But from this person's words, he was planning to do exactly that. "If you're so capable, why don't you just fly into the sky?" The three of them couldn't help but think the same thing. No matter what they thought, Luke told them to leave. He had only one request, and that was that they stayed out of the fraternity's business for a week. Cross didn't say anything. Firefox, on the other hand, was clearly handed to him to supervise. With Luke's help today, Cross had finally found his foolish son and proven that he really was his father. He had to return the favor. Luke, on the other hand, had secretly used elementary pheromone control and mental communication on Firefox to make her think, "It's just a week, I'll wait a week," to prevent her from running back to find trouble with the fraternity. Firefox was a unique and attractive female assassin, but Luke wasn't interested. After Luke was done cleaning up the fraternity, Firefox could do whatever she wanted. She could become Cross's daughter-in-law if she wanted. This definitely wasn't because Rebecca and Firefox were close friends. After seeing them off, Luke didn't waste any more time. He had just killed the repairman, and the fraternity should be taking the body back now. He was going to visit number 17 textile mill tonight. Kill people and set fires, for a healthy mind and body. On the outskirts of North Bergen along the Hackensack River, number 17 textile mill was still busy. A figure suddenly appeared outside the room where the loom was stored. After some tinkering with the door, a hidden wire was cut, rendering the warning alarm ineffective. Luke then picked the lock and opened the door. The fraternity boasted a long history. Even if an alarm system had been set up, this was still an old wooden door that looked pretty much like an antique. In fact, it was very easy to open, and was far inferior to a modern door. With regard to this form over function, Luke could only say that they had guts before he walked in. Luke was slightly amused as he looked at the loom that hummed under the lights as it wove golden thread on its own. The fraternity claimed that it was established 1,000 years ago. Putting aside when it was first proposed, the fraternity should have been around since the 11th century. But the fraternity claimed that it was because their ancestors discovered the code for the loom that they established this organization to eliminate evil and uphold justice. Then herein was the problem. It was only in the 13th century in Europe that the use of looms became widespread. Then, what was the situation with this loom? It couldn't be a loom from the beginning of the industrial age, right? Back then, the fraternity would still have to rely on people to weave cloth. If that was the case, then the weavers could choose to call whoever they wanted a bad person. Could such grand fate be proclaimed through word of mouth? Besides, if the fraternity really had something like this in the 13th century, wouldn't they hail it as a miracle and brag about it to everyone? But in the hundreds of years since then, there had been no clues or legends about this loom at all. In truth, the fraternity was only 200 years ago. That was when the first industrial revolution happened, and this loom just happened to be around the same age. The fate which the fraternity spoke of actually had to rely on the industrial revolution in order for the miracle to be revealed. Then, what about the 1,000 years before that? Luke was utterly disdainful of this legend. It was nothing more than a little trick to make the fraternity look good. They still had the nerve to say that they controlled fate. Liu Bei also claimed that he was the descendant of Lu Sheng, the king of Zhongshan, and that his ancestry went back 300 years. The fraternity had actually added at least 800 years to their history. They sure knew how to brag. It was for that reason that Luke looked down on the fraternity. These hitmen couldn't even brag about their ancestry properly. Coupled with the stupidity of using the precious and incomparable ingredients of the medicinal bath to treat assassins, Luke only had one thing to say about the fraternity: a lack of smarts was truly terrifying. Just look at how carefree Tony Stark was. In fact, the number of people who had died because of weapons manufactured by Stark Industries was definitely countless times more than the total number of the fraternity's targets in the 200 years that it had been operating. But Stark Industries was a powerful U.S. corporation, while the fraternity was a dark underworld organization. The point was that the fraternity had existed for more than 200 years and had been in the assassin business for that length of time, but this organization still couldn't see the light of day, which didn't make sense. The amazing medicinal bath alone could turn the fraternity into a major force. It could have easily developed over the years to become a formidable pharmaceutical company in modern times, but it just messed around like this for 200 years. Everyone had their own ambitions. If a normal person had to choose, how many people would want to become Sloane instead of Tony Stark? It could only be said that there was no cure for brainless people. Now, Luke had come. He felt that it was best not to keep such a brainless idiot alive. It was best to send him to meet the fate they kept talking about. But first, he had to clearly see for himself what this so-called fate was. Thinking that, he walked over to the loom, and his thoughts moved. Clack. 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 The loom of fate remained in place, working diligently. System, Host, you need to be in physical contact with the item to complete the transfer. Luke's heart jumped. D*MN, interesting. Since Daddy's system had given him a rare notification, this loom wasn't any ordinary thing. Thinking that, he placed his hand on the loom. The clacking abruptly disappeared and the room fell silent. Luke's eyes widened, but he didn't even have time to swear inwardly. System, karmic magic tool has been detected. Can be converted into 500,000 credit points or used to modify the system interface. Convert points / modify the system interface. Luke was truly stunned this time. 500,000 credit points. The bundle of evil thoughts was only worth 20,000 credit points, while the remains of Odin's destroyer was only worth 50,000. Fine, that was just some of the remains. The complete destroyer should be worth no less than 500,000 credit points. But the intact destroyer was protected by runes which Odin had left on it, and Luke couldn't forcefully put it into his inventory. In comparison, the loom of fate was easily put away. What was even more eye-catching was the karmic magic tool in the notification. This world actually had something like that. While a certain guy was feeling astonished after stealing something in passing, there was an angry roar in hell. Who was it? Who destroyed my altar? If Luke could see or hear who it was, his heart would definitely pound. Boundless black smoke exploded from Mephisto's body and surged wildly. Countless evil spirits howled as they were sucked into the black smoke and disappeared. If it were any other time, Mephisto's heart would definitely ache. These were toys that he had been collecting for many years. Now that a huge bunch of them was dead, he would have much less fun in the future. But he couldn't care less about that right now. There was only one way to describe his current state: impotent fury. Mephisto yelled all sorts of profanities in his heart. A few months ago, his clone was defeated by that strange Big Dipper, and he had no choice but to flee to hell. But his clone couldn't really escape, and was destroyed in front of him. What was even more terrifying was that Big Dipper had launched an extremely strange attack, which actually reached Mephisto's soul through his clone and struck him hard. That dark golden energy still lingered in his body. Mephisto had tried everything, but was unable to get rid of the strange energy. Conversely, he aggravated his injuries by more than 10%, which made him mad. He wasn't a demon lord who couldn't take a loss, but this was too baffling a defeat. Also, he realized that he couldn't send his clone to Earth again. As long as his clone tried to reach Earth, it would instantly be overwhelmed by that strange energy. Mephisto was an experienced and knowledgeable ancient demon. He very quickly realized that this strange energy had a special trait: it was a soul bind. It worked directly on his soul. The soul in his main body was powerful, and in his exclusive dimension of hell, he could withstand any damage to his soul. His clone's soul, however, wasn't powerful enough, and would be even weaker after it went to Earth. Naturally, it would be destroyed by the strange energy. For Mephisto, his soul wasn't like a cream cake which could be split casually. Every clone was precious. After trying twice and successfully aggravating his injuries, he gave up on going to Earth to make trouble for Big Dipper. However, these two experiments boosted the strange energy by more than 10%. It could actually use the destroyer's parts to further boost itself and increase the damage to Mephisto's main body. This made Mephisto curse the hell version of F***CKU for days. Nevertheless, he did gain something from his experiments. He could sense that this strange energy was, in the end, like water with no source. As long as he didn't continue sending out clones for it to eat, it would slowly and gradually dry out. It would disappear completely in a dozen years at most. What could Mephisto do? He was full of despair. Now, he could only stay in hell and wait for his body to recover. In any case, a decade or so wasn't long for an ancient demon like him. It was equivalent to a nap for humans. However, he didn't expect that something would happen right after he closed his eyes. The special altar which he had placed on Earth to collect premium souls suddenly disappeared. It was like someone suddenly digging out one of his kidneys. Not only that, the kidney also strangely disappeared. If this altar being wrecked was like being stabbed in the kidney, then the worse the damage to the altar, the more the knife was twisted and the worse the pain. But what was this feeling? Mephisto felt as if someone had suddenly used some method to outright extract his kidney. Before he could feel any pain, he sensed that the space in his soul occupied by the special altar was suddenly empty. It felt terrible. But Mephisto was a powerhouse who had experienced success and failure countless times. A moment later, he restrained his fury and considered the most important question: who did it? Odin? That was unlikely. Although someone from Asgard had recently gone to Earth, it definitely wasn't Odin. Odin, a top powerhouse in the universe who had conquered the 9 realms, had already settled down in Asgard thousands of years ago. There were no more records of him going out on war campaigns. The Ancient One? That was both possible and not. This mysterious sorcerer supreme could make the special altar completely disappear in an instant with her skills, but she was mostly focused on guarding against the dark dimension's Dormammu. After years of low-key operations, Mephisto was clear on this point. The reason he had only sent his clone to Earth to make a fuss was because it stopped just short of touching the Ancient One's bottom line. If he dared descend in his real form, the Ancient One wouldn't mind beating him up as if he was Dormammu. Women shouldn't be provoked, much less this bald female bigshot. This female bigshot had Sorcerer Supreme magic that could shake multiple dimensions. She absolutely couldn't be provoked. As he pondered, Mephisto couldn't think of any likely suspects. There were plenty of suspicious targets, but they were unlikely to take action. Mephisto's already black face turned even blacker. Wave after wave of black smoke spread out from his face, and countless howls rang out. The special altar was no ordinary thing. It was the only magic tool that he had made 1,000 years ago, and it contained a core spell. Using this thing, he had obtained millions of souls from Earth. It could change form, and took shape according to a person's thoughts. Then, it could use various methods to tempt people into falling and collecting premium souls for him. He remembered that more than 200 years ago, the altar had been picked up by bogus believers of some goddess of fate, and it took on the appearance of a loom. Since then, those brainless, bogus believers had been giving him premium souls non-stop, which pleased him immensely. Anyone who used the special altar was also selling their own soul. Once these bogus believers who profited from the special altar died, their souls belonged to him. In this way, Mephisto, this black-hearted businessman, ate everyone in the game. Nobody was spared. Naturally, he was very pleased with this special altar. If the clone was a customer service employee that he sent out, then the special altar was a customer service robot that could automatically answer simple questions. The altar wasn't as flexible as a clone, but it was a stable source of income that he didn't have to worry about for a long time. Now that this fuss-free source of income was gone, Mephisto could only lament, "Forget it. I'll try to make another one when I have the chance." He wasn't in a good mood about that. The altar was special to him and truly wasn't ordinary. Putting aside the bizarre and precious raw materials it required, he himself would have to take 300 to 500 years to finish making one. He had suffered a huge loss. Luke didn't know that he had tripped up the high and mighty demon lord once again. After a moment of shock, he didn't immediately choose to use the loom, but tried to suppress his emotions. When his inventory was modified last time, he had been locked out for half a day. If the interface was modified this time, what if Daddy's system itself went on strike? Luke was here tonight to earn experience points and level up. Since he was already here, he should finish what he set out to do. He said he was going to dispose of the fraternity, so he should do so. He said he was going to earn experience and credit points, so he should earn enough. What he didn't know was that the moment the loom of fate disappeared from the room, many people around the world suddenly felt their minds jolt and like something was missing, and they started to panic. This included all the assassins in number 17 textile mill. Sloane closed his eyes for a moment and frowned. Can you feel it? The dozen or so elite assassins in front of him nodded in unison. A woman couldn't help but ask, Sloane, what's going on? Sloane's mind whirled, but he could only shake his head. I don't know, but I feel like I'm missing something. Most of them subconsciously nodded since they felt the same thing. For a moment, everybody looked at Sloane, hoping he could give them an answer. This old man controlled classified information in the fraternity. He might know something about what just happened. Unfortunately, Sloane's face darkened, and in the end, he simply said, I'm tired. Disperse. He then turned around and left. The dozen people looked at each other in bewilderment. After exchanging glances, they could only get up and prepare to leave. Bang! 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 Pa! 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 Suddenly, sporadic gunfire rang out. Everybody looked at the door. What's going on? Is this an enemy attack? Let's go and take a look. With 2 simple sentences, everybody hurried to the door. They were fast and had numbers on their side. They weren't scared even if it was Cross who had come. Gunshots rang out a few more times, but then abruptly stopped. Hearing the gunshots, everybody knew that the person was trading fire with the guards, but wasn't going on the offensive. The person was only firing back when the guards attacked him. What was even more frightening was that the enemy only fired once for every several shots fired by the guards. Clearly, several guards had lost their lives in the fight. The assassins soon reached the front entrance, and saw that the guards on the wall and in the towers had stopped firing. Bodies had fallen from the towers. Alarmed, the assassins scattered and went up onto the surrounding wall to look outside. They saw a man in a black suit with a beard and slicked back hair standing in the dark. He didn't raise the gun in his hand, but simply looked at the people on the wall. Seeing the dozen or so elite assassins, the man in the suit finally said, "Tell Sloane to come out." His voice was calm and emotionless, like how most people spoke to the cashiers in fast food restaurants, flat and indifferent, neither happy nor sad. Everybody was silent. The group looked at each other but didn't say anything. Finally, the gunsmith asked, "Who are you?" The man in the suit finally tilted his head and looked at him. "John Wick. You can also call me the boogeyman." Everybody's hearts skipped a beat, and they were shocked. Was he crazy? He had gotten someone to send a message yesterday, and he already came knocking today. Did he think he could take on the fraternity? Then why call yourself the boogeyman? Might as well call yourself Death. Eventually, it was the gunsmith who spoke again. "State your business." The man in the suit didn't reply, and even looked away, as if the gunsmith suddenly didn't exist. F***CKU. Everybody cursed. This was just asking to die. Do you think this is a movie? What they didn't know was that although there were no cameras rolling, Luke was indeed here to act. John Wick. An aged voice rang out, and Sloane appeared at the window of a high tower behind the wall. Looking down, Sloane said indifferently, "What do you have to say?" Luke chuckled inwardly and raised his head. "I'm just here to tell you something." Nobody in the fraternity played along. Luke felt a little regretful. These extras weren't professional at all. None of them asked, "What is it?" Putting on a show for himself, he maintained John's classic calm face. "I'll kill anyone who tries to kill me." Sloane. The elite assassins. The guards. Many people wondered, are we being threatened to our face? And in our front yard? This really felt like a surprise, moment. Sloane's eyes flickered, but he didn't have any expression. He simply ordered calmly, "Kill him." He barely said the words, when gunshots rang out. All the guards opened fire almost at the same time, and bullets rained down on the clearing in front of the entrance. Sloane was still standing quietly at the high window. The elite assassins only drew their guns, and didn't open fire. They weren't small fry, and were quite arrogant. There was only one enemy. Even Boogeyman John, who had become famous recently, wasn't worthy enough for all of them to attack him together. Dozens of guards launched an attack. They didn't want to disgrace themselves in this siege. Their faces changed the next moment. There was no one at the entrance. Under everyone's gazes, the boogeyman disappeared. It seemed to happen in the blink of an eye. But who were they? They were famous assassins from the fraternity, and had innate reflexes and dynamic vision which far exceeded that of an ordinary person. All this time, they were the ones who relied on their super abilities to suddenly disappear in front of their opponents. But someone had played this same trick in front of them. At that moment, even the lofty Sloane's expression changed. He remembered Night Wolf and White Dove. In a 2v1, they had died without a sound. And it was Boogeyman John who had told them to spread the word. Don't hold back. Kill him at once. Sloane's voice rang out, and even the sound of gunfire couldn't drown it out. Once the order was given, everybody, including the elite assassins, knew that the other party had to be eliminated without fail. Soon, all the lights in the stronghold were turned on, lighting up the dark expanse. In the textile factory, the workers who received the word took out their guns and instantly turned into assassins. Bang! 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 Gunshots burst out in the factory. The ordinary assassins who were waiting in line to get their guns from the gun room cried out in alarm as they were shot. They fell one after another, like a row of bloody dominoes. At some point, the man in the black suit had appeared in the factory with an MP7 in each hand. In the face of these ordinary assassins, Luke used the MP7, which was rare. It could hold 40 bullets, and was very lethal. The assassins who were waiting for guns were shot dead one by one. This time, Luke didn't use the Mozambique method. Killing each enemy with 2 bullets would be too slow. Shooting them in the stomach was also too slow. All the assassins were shot in the head, without exception. At a distance of 10 meters, there wasn't much of a difference if Luke used an MP7 or a Glock. He had more control, and the speed at which he killed was only hampered by the speed at which he switched targets. The expressions of the elite assassins who were still outside the stronghold and had yet to return immediately changed. The 4 people closest to the factory activated physical outburst at the same time and charged over in 2 seconds. They saw Luke relax his grip on the 2 MP7s and let them fall. His hands flashed over his waist like phantoms as 2 Glocks appeared. The 4 elite assassins who had just rushed in narrowed their eyes when they saw the 2 Glocks. The excessively long clip at the bottom of each gun was clearly a special extension. It was probably one of those crazy ones which contained 33 bullets. Coupled with his shooting speed, Luke could use the Glock like a submachine gun at close range. Bang! 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 Under the gazes of the elite assassins, the muzzles of the 2 Glock guns unleashed lethal firepower. The ordinary assassins in the factory had just been annihilated by the MP7s, when more of them ran out of a passage. They had been in a side building, and had immediately rushed over when they heard the gunshots. The passage they came through was usually used for moving goods, so it was wide enough for big trucks to drive through. The passage was 5 meters wide, and the assassins swarmed over like a nest of hornets. They were then met with the fierce firepower of 2 Glocks. These assassins, who were considered elites among ordinary people, collapsed before they even saw Luke. Not a single assassin was able to charge through the passage before they were all killed and started to pile up, like straw under an old sickle. A few assassins who had fallen behind sweated and hid around the corner at the end of the passage. They no longer had the courage to stick their heads out. Bang! 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 The 4 elite assassins finally launched a first round of attacks before the Glocks could fire again. These elite assassins were ruthless and efficient, and far stronger than the ordinary veterans whom Luke had killed 2 days ago. When they charged in, they automatically scattered in 4 different directions to overwhelm the enemy. Luke's reaction was unexpected. Even as 4 bullets were fired at him, the Glocks in his hands still didn't switch directions, and he stubbornly blew up the heads of the last 7 or 8 ordinary assassins. When the bullets flew at him, he blurred for a moment before he appeared 2 meters away. The assassin's shooting precision hit a new snag. Because they were too accurate, there was no way the bullets could fly wide by more than 2 meters, so Luke naturally wasn't hurt. At that moment, his Glocks were finally empty. Luke relaxed his hands again, and the Glocks dropped. Before they even dropped halfway, he reached under his armpits again. Just before they hit the ground, he already had 2 more guns. This time, it was no longer Glocks with long clips, but 2 modified P226s. In fact, in the short time it had taken him to throw away the Glocks and take out the P226s, he had already successfully avoided the 4 bullets. He also left a faint afterimage in the air as he quickly approached 2 people in the factory. Bang! 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 The 2 men were shocked by Luke's sudden burst of speed, but they didn't panic, and fired as he approached them. The 2 elite assassins didn't exchange words even as they worked in tandem and opened fire once more to block his approach, 2 of the bullets even curving. They knew very well that they weren't as strong as this boogeyman, but they weren't fighting alone. In 2 seconds, 3 to 5 elite assassins would arrive. In 5 seconds, more than 10 of them would be here. No matter how powerful this boogeyman was, he would be turned into Swiss cheese. At that moment, Luke was only 10 meters away. He had to get close in order to kill the enemy instantly. Pa! 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 He fired 3 times at each of the 2 gunmen. Their expressions changed as they split up, trying to pull away so that they weren't in Luke's attack range at the same time. Bang! 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 2 men in a doorway also opened fire. They would be able to kill the boogeyman if they hit him, and if they didn't, they would still be able to disrupt his attack on their comrades and create a chance for a counterattack. Suddenly, Luke spun like a top, his arms swinging out. Bang! 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 4 bullets were fired at the 2 people on the left and right. The expressions of all 4 elite assassins changed abruptly, and they almost cried out in unison, "No! That's impossible!" The first "no" was from the 2 men Luke was attacking, while the second exclamation was from the 2 men at the doorway. The bullets flew at the 2 men at odd angles from both sides. Pooh! Pooh! Both men were shot in the head at the same time. The 2 men at the doorway subconsciously shouted again, "How did you?" But Luke didn't stop spinning. Almost the moment the 2 assassins died, his hands swung around again. Pa! 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 This time, the bullets flew at the 2 in the doorway. The 2 of them were staring death in the face, and their half-spoken words turned into bellows of despair. No. At that moment, they each had to face a barrage of 5 bullets. What was even more frightening was that not only did all the 5 bullets curve, they flew in different arcs. To their sharp eyes, the bullets were like a swarm of mini-missiles that couldn't be dodged. Even though they knew curve shooting like the back of their hands and could use different curve bullets, everyone in the fraternity could only fire once at a time. In comparison, this boogeyman had fired 10 consecutive shots in different arcs and attacked 2 targets at the same time. This completely overturned their worldview. In their shock, they couldn't calculate the trajectory of the bullets at all, and could only subconsciously dodge in one direction. Pooh! 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 2 people who had been rushing over suddenly collapsed and rolled 7 to 8 times over the ground before they stopped. The weaker one was shot in the head and stomach, while the stronger one had just one hole in his head. But none of them escaped death. Luke didn't stop spinning, and his hands moved even faster. Pa! 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 The remaining bullets in the gun scattered and flew in arcs at several dark doorways. There were 2 groans, and the hurried footsteps around him slowed down. Luke was amused. There were actually 2 weaklings. They couldn't even withstand 2 bullets from so far away. How terrible! Thinking that, he stopped and stood in the center of the factory. He unhurriedly removed an empty clip from one gun. Come in. I promise I won't shoot first. 5 figures appeared at 3 doorways. 2 of them had ugly expressions. One gripped his arm, and the other his stomach. These 2 were the weaker ones among the elite assassins, and had been shot. The other 3 were unharmed, but their expressions were still dark. They had also broken out in a cold sweat at the sudden barrage of bullets. Even if they were completely unharmed, that didn't mean that they weren't scared. If they had been careless, they might have been killed by one of the bullets. A battle between top killers was just this dangerous. Only a few centimeters stood between them and death. Seeing that Luke was reloading, one of them suddenly raised his gun. Luke was still reloading. But the moment the man moved, Luke's right hand swung out. Pa! A bullet flew at this elite assassin who had wanted to take advantage of the moment. Pooh! The other 4 looked at their comrade in disbelief. There was a hole in the man's temple. His grin didn't change, but he was as dead as could be. Luke dropped the empty clip of the P226 and reloaded. How did this person become an assassin? He didn't know I had one last bullet left in the barrel. The expressions of the 4 elite assassins grew even uglier, but there was fear in their eyes. The person who died wasn't the strongest nor the weakest of them. This sort of average person couldn't avoid a shot. What was even more terrifying was that this boogeyman was actually using curve shooting. What a joke! Physical outburst and curve shooting were the 2 best skills for top assassins in the fraternity. It was with these 2 skills that they could stand out from countless ordinary assassins and become legendary killers with extraordinary abilities. But now, an outsider had used their trump card to kill their comrade in front of them. There was no reconciling this matter. But nobody moved, because Luke already had a reloaded P226. This gun could hold 20 bullets, they didn't think they could withstand 20 shots. The 4 elite assassins who had entered the factory first but were already dead were the most direct proof of this. They waited. It would take a few seconds at most for the others to arrive. What they didn't know was that Luke had added a bit of telekinesis to the last bullet. With a little more speed and a slight shift in direction, that bullet which could have been easily dodged hit its target. Luke reloaded his other P226 unhurriedly and glanced at the 4 people. They got goosebumps all over their bodies. They weren't ordinary people, and could easily tell that Luke didn't look at them in fear or even excitement, like a kid counting biscuits. Actually, Luke was indeed thinking, 1,000. 1,000. 1,000. 1,000. The 5 elite assassins who had died just now were worth an average of around 1,000 experience and credit points each, which was slightly more than Luke had expected. The 4 people in front of him were just numbers in his eyes. After reloading, Luke's hands dropped naturally as he glanced around. Several seconds later, people quietly appeared at the doorways and windows one by one as they surrounded Luke. They remained silent and simply observed him. Their hands twitched, but they managed to hold back. The bodies of 5 elite assassins were intimidating enough, they at least had more impact than the bodies of more than 100 regular assassins. For a moment, the air in the factory almost froze. Standing in the center, Luke didn't do anything. Like a tiger, he observed the wolves that were slowly taking advantage of his position. Boogeyman, what are you waiting for? The voice of an old man rang out, and Sloane walked out of a dark passage as he frowned at Luke. Luke said, "You." Sloane asked, "Are you going to beg for mercy?" Luke shook his head. "No, I'm just afraid that you'll run." A fierce light flashed in Sloane's eyes. "Then what are you waiting for?" Luke turned to look at him and suddenly smiled. "No, don't misunderstand. I'm not targeting you. I just want to say that all of you here are garbage." When he said the last half of his sentence, the 13 elite assassins left, including Sloane, didn't understand what he meant. But Sloane, the old fox, was the first to react. Wasn't this person just taunting them? Humiliated, Sloane's face turned dark as he yelled, "You're counting death." The other people reacted quickly as well. It was probably less than 0.1 seconds before they reacted, and their faces looked like they had just eaten **T. But Luke closed his eyes, spread his arms, and sighed. "This world is so beautiful. Kill him." Without any hesitation, Sloane gave the order. All the assassins raised their guns. Bang! 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 "I shouldn't be so violent," Luke's voice echoed in the factory, and could still be heard clearly even over the sound of gunshots. Pa! An elite assassin who was darting between looms was shot in the head, and a figure in a black suit flashed behind the threads. A string of bullets hit nothing. "This isn't good," the calm voice continued. Pa! A second assassin came up against the muzzle of a gun. He was shot in the forehead at a distance of 1 meter, and he couldn't dodge in time. "Not good. Pa!" The words were followed by a swift second shot, which hit a third assassin who was lunging at Luke, and pierced his eye. "Only love. Pa!" The barely visible black figure instantly covered more than 10 meters and flashed past 2 looms. "And justice. Pa!" Past the 2 looms, the 4th and 5th assassins collapsed after they were shot in the head. "Will last forever. Pa!" A terrified 6th assassin tried to turn around and see the black figure that was charging at him from behind, but blood exploded at the back of his head and his body smashed into a loom. Large amounts of blood dyed the cloth red, creating a strange pattern over it. "Bring to the world. Pa!" A 7th assassin ran to the side and tried to escape the factory. The black figure that he couldn't see clearly flashed past him and fired a bullet into his brain. "New life. Pa!" An 8th assassin had just jumped out a window, when he was hit in the temple by a curved bullet from the side. The joy of escape was still on his face, but he was no longer breathing. "So, I'm looking forward to it." Bang! 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 World peace. Bang! 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 With the last 2 sentences, bullets flew out like a storm. Like brave soldiers surrounding the enemy, they flew at the remaining 4 elite assassins. "No!" The 2 weaklings who had been shot by Luke at the beginning yelled again. It was only at that moment they realized that the 2 bullets which Luke had fired were moving in the shape of an S. Curved shooting didn't include a move like that. That's cheating. The thought flashed through their minds just before their heads exploded. The other 2 assassins had already been taken care of by 4 S-curve bullets. They collapsed before they could even scream. The factory was quiet once more. Luke raised his head and closed his eyes. He spread his arms and raised his guns, like a star who had just finished his final performance. 10 meters away, Sloane's face was black. Just like that, 12 famous hitmen with extraordinary abilities had died. They were stronger and faster, and died very quickly. Facing Luke, who was determined to eliminate them, they were no more able to withstand the onslaught than the regular assassins from a few days ago. For top students who could get 100, those who scored 60 and 80 were all trash students. The reason top students got full marks was because to them, there were only 100 marks on the exam paper. Either way, trash students would be crushed. In front of Luke, both ordinary and elite assassins were far from being his match. So, they died, and in less than 5 seconds. Sloane's eyes flickered, and he finally said, "You're not the boogeyman." Luke slowly opened his eyes and looked into the old man's eyes. His faint smile was still there. "Congratulations, you got it." Sloane stared at him for a moment, then said again, "Killing someone, reciting poetry, and still so strong." Pausing for a moment, he suddenly said, "You're that V. V without a smiling mask." Luke smiled again. "That's right, you got it again. Now, I've decided to choose you as the only lucky audience member to die on the spot." Bang! Bang! He raised his guns and fired. Sloane dodged the 2 bullets and took out an antique pistol. Bang! 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 4 bullets were actually deflected. Luke was slightly surprised, but he dodged the attack and smiled. "It seems you're also not the Sloane I know." As he spoke, he fired again without hesitation. Sloane dodged again and his face finally darkened. "Young man, you know nothing about strength." As he spoke, he raised his gun, and his arm turned into an afterimage as the Mauser fired non-stop right at Luke, as if Sloane was pressing in for a close-range gunfight. Narrowing his eyes, Luke met the man head-on without any hesitation, and fired back with double the firepower. He activated the complete version of gunfighting. With his explosive strength and extraordinary physique, he dodged left and right, and completely avoided the bullets. On the other hand, Sloane didn't dodge at all, and simply lunged forward. Amidst the light and sparks, Luke realized that the bullets that hit Sloane just left bullet holes in him. Sloane was dark-skinned, but his blood was no different in color. The bullet holes didn't bleed, however, but spurted out black smoke. Sloane didn't seem affected at all as he moved. Instead, he lunged forward even more quickly. Physical damage had no effect. Thinking that, Luke dropped his guns and pulled out 2 knives. The 2 of them were now very close to each other, and Sloane had used up the bullets in his pistol. He threw away his Mauser pistol and roared, "You actually made me use my trump card. Go to hell. Poochie. Poochie." They flashed past each other, and the sound of flesh being cut rang out. Sloane turned around abruptly, shock and anger on his face. "That's impossible. How can you be so strong?" As soon as he said that, black smoke spurted from the dozen wounds on his upper torso and covered most of his body. Luke also turned around, the smile on his face gone. He seemed to be deep in thought. This black smoke seemed to be an old acquaintance. Even ordinary people would be able to smell the sulfur and rot from the black smoke. Why did it smell so much like that old monster Mephisto? Then, he saw Sloane's face and body warp slightly, as if he was about to turn into black smoke. Luke lunged forward again, and the knives in his hand turned into 2 dark streaks of light that enveloped Sloane's upper body. Even though Sloane had been slashed dozens of times, he still wasn't defending himself. His fists rained down, unexpectedly. He was an expert at close combat. Sloane, this old fraternity boss who looked like he had 1 foot in the grave, was actually using his fists instead of a gun. That was truly awesome. Thinking that, an invisible sheen covered the knives in Luke's hands. Elementary annihilation, activated. Poochie. Poochie. Sloane, who had been slashed dozens of times again, lost his momentum. He howled and rolled on the ground. Just now, Luke had attached elementary annihilation to the 2 combat knives. The moment they clashed, Sloane's limbs were cut off without hesitation. He, who thought that he was invincible, immediately lost. At that moment, Sloane had a meltdown. This form, which couldn't be affected by physical attacks, was something he had painstakingly acquired from the loom of fate. It was a terrifying and practical ability. Sloane had escaped death several times with it. The big boss and patron behind the fraternity was very powerful, but still couldn't supplant Sloane and take control of the organization because Sloane had this terrifying ability. When the other party had tested the waters by making a move, not only weren't they able to put Sloane in his place, he paid them back twofold. Sloane didn't kill the patron, he just killed the elite bodyguards who accompanied the person. Everything settled down after that. As long as Sloane continued to control the fraternity, the patron could only use money to order the elite assassins around. They had a closer relationship than between client and mercenary, but it absolutely wasn't a boss and subordinate relationship. It was also because of this ability that Sloane, who had used a gun at the beginning, secretly learned many combat skills later on, and became an extremely powerful killing machine. Physical damage had no effect on him, and there was no time limit to how long he could use physical outburst. He could easily kill all the other members of the fraternity, so nobody dared to stand up to him. However, there was a high price to pay for using invulnerable abilities, and it took time to prepare. Sloane knew that the cost was high, and he would never use it if he could. Thus, he had held back and didn't take action, despite his subordinates being killed one after another. As long as he could kill a powerful opponent like Luke, losing some of his men was worth it. Their patron had plenty of money and resources, and the men Sloane had in reserve only needed to be trained for 3 to 5 years before they became elite assassins. The fraternity would recover. Also, when he watched his subordinates fight Luke, he was sure that he could kill this arrogant guy. After all the elite assassins died, Sloane knew he had to take action. Even if there were still dozens of guards outside, they were just a bunch of nobodies in front of Boogeyman John. When he finally made a move, the first half went exactly as Sloane had imagined. Luke's bullets were useless against him. Even if he pulled out 2 knives, they were just a last-ditch attempt. The black smoke would return to Sloane's body, and he would be completely fine. Many powerful enemies collapsed when they saw this, and immediately ran away. He decided to catch this troublemaker and torture him to death so that he could vent his anger over his subordinates. Those elite assassins had been very useful tools. His heart really ached when they all died. But in this second confrontation, this was a one-sided clash. Sloane was in trouble. The knives, which had elementary annihilation on them, easily cut off Sloane's limbs. This time, however, no more black smoke spurted out of his wounds, it was as if it had been sealed away. Even his broken limbs were unchanged as they lay scattered on the ground. Not just that, after he activated his ability, any pain he felt from his injuries would be significantly reduced. Now, however, it was as if his wounds were being corroded by acid. Sloane screamed and struggled on the ground, disbelief and fear in his eyes. No, that's impossible. How can this be? Where's the immortal body that God gave me? Regenerating limbs? Reducing the pain? These were the thoughts that filled his mind, and even the physical pain couldn't suppress these questions. Luke sheathed his knives and ignored the old man. Sloane, who had lost his limbs, was just a fat lamb on a chopping block. Picking up the 2 guns that he had just tossed to the side, Luke quickly reloaded and ran out of the factory. Bang! 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 Gunshots rang out, and the guards yelled in panic. Then, the sound of gunfire gradually turned sporadic, and the shouting stopped. There was nothing but silence outside. Then, Luke returned. Sloane was trying to move, his body wriggling like a maggot as he headed for a particular passage. Expressionlessly, Luke walked over, raised a knife, and flung it. Poochie. Duong. Sloane froze. He slowly looked down and saw his chest, abdomen, and nothing else under that. Luke had already kicked his lower torso 10 meters away. Intense pain assailed Sloane, and he howled again. Luke walked deeper into the factory without looking back and smiled. You can still run even without hands or legs, do you think your stomach muscles are that great? I've cut off your waist, let's see how lively you are after that. At that moment, there were only a few ordinary assassins hiding in the textile factory. But Luke sensed them and easily found them and shot them in the head. Why are you hiding, you be asterisk stars? As bad guys, you should be prepared to turn into experience and credit points at any time. As Luke murmured to himself, he walked into what looked like a freezer unit. There were some pig carcasses hanging on hooks, and even some human bodies mixed among them. Some of the bodies were fake, but some were real. Luke frowned. He didn't really care about cleanliness when he was harvesting experience and credit points. However, some of the bodies were old and some were young. They didn't look like professionals, but there were bullet holes and knife wounds on them. To Luke's experienced eye, the cuts were clearly made before death, while the bullet holes were made after death. These people had been tortured with knives and their bodies later used as targets. The fraternity's insane behavior was disgusting. They didn't even have the most basic respect for people. Walking in, he turned his head slowly, as if searching for something. Suddenly, there was a roar as a metal stake pierced through a pig carcass and headed straight for Luke's back. It was as if Luke had eyes on his back. He turned at the right moment to avoid the sneak attack. Hands brushing over his waist, he unsheathed the two military knives once more. Amidst jarring clanking, a burly, bearded fatty in a vest and an apron smashed into Luke with a butcher knife in one hand and an iron stake in the other. The weapons tangled together, the metal screeching. Their movements were smooth and quick. Although they didn't use the same fighting style, they were both very familiar with close-range combat. The difference was that the fatty roared as he slashed with the knife. He was savage and barbaric, like a monster. Luke, on the other hand, simply brandished his blade silently. During their fight, the fatty would knock into the pig carcasses without any qualms, but Luke didn't even touch the meat once. While the fatty was shouting and getting more and more excited, Luke suddenly said, "That's all you have? Get lost." Before the fatty could understand what Luke meant, he felt a terrifying power explode from the knives. Even though the fatty was the one whose strength increased the most with physical outburst in the fraternity, there was no way he could fight this. His weapons were tangled up with the knives, which then lightly brushed past his wrists like two vipers. The fatty released his grip on his weapons, which were sent flying a few meters to stab into a pig carcass. He looked at his opponent's deceptively weak appearance in shock and was about to say something. Luke didn't give him the chance. His two knives turned into afterimages as he swung them around. Too slow, you're too slow. If you're slow, you hesitate, and if you hesitate, you'll be defeated. Faster, you have to be faster at evading. You don't even know how to evade knives. What rubbish knife skills have you been practicing? Trash, die. His shout was as fierce as the two knives, and the fatty was struck both physically and mentally. As if he had been shocked by electricity, the fatty swayed left and right amidst countless arcs of dark light, but didn't fall. It was just the blood that splattered from the black knives which turned into beads of blood that flew in countless arcs inside the freezer. Once the scolding was over, the fatty stared lifelessly at Luke. His lips moved as he said, "Good, very fast, fast knife." Thump. Bang. He fell to his knees with a heavy thump, and he collapsed again. Dark red blood flowed out from under him and stained the ground. Luke chuckled and slashed at the metal stake that was stuck in the pig carcass next to him. With a slash of his knife, the stake came loose. Clang. Poochie. The metal stake flew out and stabbed into the head of the fatty who was lying on the ground. Perfect. This fatty was called the Butcher, and was one of the elite assassins. If there was one thing he had in common with Luke's Ghost Butcher alias, it was the countless number of people he had killed. Luke just killed bad guys to earn credit. This guy didn't just kill for money, he also liked to kill the innocent. The Butcher was a psycho who liked to hang out in the slaughter room, so he hadn't participated in the battle just now. But this guy was already on Luke's blacklist, and couldn't be allowed to live. The 1,800 experience and credit points were enough to prove that this guy's hands were bloody and he deserved to die. After killing the lunatic, Luke wandered around a textile factory and threw anything that he was interested in into his inventory. He then returned to where the half-dead Sloane was, and brought him into the slaughter room. Finding a hook, Luke hung the old man up and said, "Tell me everything about the patron behind you." Sloane's eyes flickered. "I don't know, ah." Before he finished, he gave a blood-curdling scream. Luke's military knife brushed past him lightly, and a piece of black flesh fell to the ground. "It's fine. There's still plenty of places that can be cut. Also, this immortal body of yours is very awesome. I don't have to worry about you dying." He was certain that the old man still wanted to live, and was looking for a chance to escape. He didn't want to die. Otherwise, once this unusual immortal state was removed, Sloane would definitely die very quickly. Luke shook his head. Perhaps not that quickly. Some people who were cut at the waist could live for a long time. But Sloane's lips were firmly sealed, and his strange body didn't feel any pain. He didn't even need to breathe. Using an inducer on him was basically useless. Only elementary annihilation could cause the guy intense pain. Luke cut off a huge pile of flesh, like he was slicing beef, before he was able to extract a lot of intelligence. Even so, this old man was very dishonest. He lied again and again when asked about the ingredients for the medicinal bath, but he didn't know that Luke had already investigated everything. Apart from the specific location of the medicinal bath's main ingredient, Luke knew everything else. Even if Sloane was stubborn and killed himself, it didn't affect Luke much. Luke naturally didn't scruple to slice off more flesh, making them so thin they were almost transparent. Only then did he finally obtain information on the main raw ingredient. It was an extract from a strange flower in the depths of the Amazon jungle, which in some primitive tribes was called blood orchid. Sloane had set up a secret plantation of his own there, and nobody in the fraternity knew about it. After hearing about the blood orchid extract, Luke was intrigued. He took out a small syringe from his pocket. "Is this it?" Seeing the ruby-red liquid in the bottle, Sloane was instantly full of despair. "Why torture me if you already know? Are you crazy?" Luke felt a little embarrassed since he really hadn't known. This ruby-red liquid was what the criminals had been looking for when Robert and Catherine's ship was hijacked. The mutant giant octopus that had appeared later had also scrambled after this thing. Luke had studied it for a while, but didn't make any progress, so he put it aside for the moment. Drugs weren't part of Tony Stark's expertise, and it wasn't worth squandering this rare blood orchid extract. It had only been tested on Carter, the previous Ghost Rider, and the man was still alive and kicking. Thinking that, Luke's heart jumped. "Last summer, did your people hijack an Atlantic cruise liner to steal the blood orchid extract?" Sloane nodded despondently. "Yes." Luke asked, "Why?" "Someone bribed the workers and a guard in the plantation to steal a batch of blood orchid extract. After I found out, I sent someone to steal it back," said Sloane. Luke asked, "Did word of it leak?" Sloane said, "I disposed of the workers and guard. I then had someone kill the seller and the mastermind. Nobody made trouble for me again after that." At that point, Luke basically understood that the blood orchid extract he was holding was from the batch that had been stolen. He thought for a moment, then asked, "Your big boss never wanted this for himself?" Sloane said, "He did, but I killed dozens of his bodyguards and had a chat with him by his bed." He stopped asking after that. Luke was lost for words. What a poser. But on second thought, if he ran into Sloane without elementary annihilation, it would be hard to deal with him. Sloane couldn't die, wasn't afraid of pain, and could recover quickly. Coupled with curve shooting and physical outburst, there weren't many people in the world who could stop him. Did he never think of working with you to create a drug that can save lives? Luke was still a little curious. Sloane said, "Using physical outburst too much causes organ failure and death. Using curve shooting too much will cause brain damage and turn you into a cripple. The medicinal bath has to be used for recovery, otherwise the more battles the elite assassins fight, the faster they will die. How can I give this away? Luke rubbed his chin. Then, if everyone stopped using these two abilities and just retired, they would still be able to live well, right? Sloane smiled bitterly. Who can resist using this sort of power? Luke understood perfectly. This was Sloane's way to secretly control the upper echelons of the fraternity. It was a pity that Cross had appeared, and he was best at schemes and extreme long-distance sniping. He could already torment the fraternity without using physical outburst and curve shooting. Sloane's check and balance of power didn't work on him. But Sloane couldn't be said to be stupid. Cross's quick mind and extreme long-distance sniping were both top-notch talents. The fraternity had been in this business for years and had groomed countless assassins, but only this one prodigy had emerged. By now, Luke had learned the key point about the medicinal bath. Looking at Sloane, he asked, "Any last words?" Sloane stared at him fixedly. "I've already told you what you wanted to know. Then, let me know one thing before I die." Luke nodded and said, "Go on." "Sloane, who on earth are you?" Luke said, "Didn't you already guess it? I'm V." "Sloane, that's impossible. How can V be the boogeyman?" "Poochie." Sloane's eyes widened, and he felt a sharp pain in his head, as if a burning steel blade had pierced his brain. The next moment, his consciousness exploded and disappeared. "Sorry, but I like to let people die with unanswered questions." Luke drew back his knife. Looking at the system notification, Luke saw that he now had the experience and credit points for killing Sloane, and he stored the body in Space 1. System, bundle of evil thoughts has been detected. Can be converted into 1000 credit points or to modify the inventory's functions. Convert/modify. Luke took a look, and then his gaze swept over the beef slices and the 4 limbs which Sloane had left behind, before he put them into Space 1. As he expected, there was another system notification, but these things could only be converted into 900 credit points. In other words, Sloane, this package, could be converted into almost 2000 experience and credit points, which was 1/10 what Blackheart had been worth. It wasn't a lot, but it was a profit. Thinking that, Luke took out his phone. "It's me, John Wick. I want to make a dinner reservation for 187 people. The address is North Bergen, number 17 Textile Mill. I'm not joking. I'll wait for you at the entrance in half an hour." With that, he walked out. When he reached the high wall of the entrance, he sat on the battlement and started humming a song. Humph, Luke felt that he was still short of something. He took out a bottle of beer and a bag of salted peanuts from his pocket. Taking a sip of his beer and cracking open 2 peanuts, he raised his head and looked at the sky. "Ah, what a shame there's no moon tonight. Amitba, excellent, excellent." 20 minutes later, a van and a container truck drove to the front of the textile factory. The first thing they saw was the man in black sitting on the wall, like a person relaxing on his own front porch with a drink. A thin old man got out of the van and asked, "Are you sure we can go in to clean up?" Luke nodded and didn't say anything. He simply tossed down a bag. The old man caught it easily and opened it. He saw 4 rolls of gold coins. This was the standard roll for the gold coins. There were 50 of them in each roll. John had used a lot of gold coins, and naturally didn't have enough. Luke had just found this after rummaging around in the fraternity. Just nice, he could use them for collecting the bodies of the fraternity members. The old man raised his head again. Too much. Luke popped another peanut into his mouth. Tip. After a brief silence, the old man took off his hat and bowed. "It's my honor to be at your service, sir." At the same time, the dozen men who got out of the vehicles bowed respectfully. Luke simply hummed a response and stood up. The beer bottle and the peanut shells had already been put away in Luke's inventory, there was nothing else here worth lingering over. By the time the old man and the others raised their heads, the figure on the wall had disappeared. The old man heaved a sigh and turned around to look at his guys. "Keep your mouths shut. If anyone asks about tonight, tell them to come look for me. Got it?" Everybody said, "Got it." The old man was in the lead, and wasn't too surprised to see the bodies of the men lying on the ground. When he entered the main factory, however, his expression changed and he exclaimed, "Holy sh*t. OMG. Wow." The old man had cleaned up places with more bodies many times before. But there were very few cases in which they had all been killed by one person. As for cases in which the dead was one of the 12 members of the High Table, those could be counted on one hand. The dead people here were the core of the fraternity, which used combat force and assassination to sit at the High Table. This was the first time in the old man's life that he had ever encountered something like this. It was also the reason why he had been so courteous earlier. Someone who could level the fraternity's headquarters on his own was, to a certain extent, an existence on the same level as the 12 members. One person couldn't compare with a group, but this man was able to kill most people who opposed him, including the 12 members and their direct subordinates. Hitmans were pawns for the High Table, but when this pawn was more powerful than the player, few people were willing to fight him. Nobody was stupid. Only an idiot would take action when there was nothing to gain. Besides, Boogeyman John was best at ambushes and assassinations. How many people at the High Table could avoid being assassinated by him? The old man didn't know what the High Table would do to John in the future, but before it made an announcement, John was an existence to be feared. As they cleaned up, they split up and checked the identities of the bodies. The preliminary sorting was soon done, and an assistant walked over with a shocked but excited expression. He said in a low voice, "Boss, we've checked, except for Sloan, the other 18 elite assassins are all dead. 17 had their heads blown up, and only the butcher had knife wounds and was nailed to the ground." The old man took a deep breath, and waved at his assistant to get back to work. After the assistant left, he took out his phone and made a call. He said in a low voice, "Winston, I need to tell you a big piece of news. It's about Mr. Wick." A moment later, at the Continental Hotel, Winston put down his phone and rubbed his forehead. He murmured, "Calm down. I need to calm down. Let me think, let me think." He had always admired John Wick, and knew that this guy was very capable. But this time. Aren't you a little too capable? If you're so awesome, why didn't you say so earlier? Would that idiot Santino still dare provoke you? Winston couldn't help but fall into a deep stupor. It wasn't that the news wasn't valuable, but it was still useless. John had cleaned up the core of the fraternity on his own. Winston had never heard of anything like it in all his years. One of the 12 members of the High Table, and the one with an extremely powerful fighting force, had been killed, just like that. Although the member who represented the fraternity at the High Table was still alive, Sloan and the dozen or so elite assassins were all dead. Sloan, in particular, hadn't taken part in many years, but Winston knew some of the rumors. The High Table member was only the fraternity's head, while the body that represented its power was Sloan and the elite assassins. If only the fraternity's head was left, what use was it? Even if this person used his own armed forces to make up for the lack, it still wouldn't compare with Sloan. After re-establishing itself, the fraternity would at most have a baby's body and a big head. It would be significantly weakened for a long time. Recalling the Tarasov family, which had lost at least 30% of its forces, and the fact that both Kimura heirs were dead, Winston couldn't help but sigh. The High Table won't stay calm after this. Following that phone call, the news that all the core members of the fraternity were dead spread quickly. Phones rang one after another in the night. The bosses were dumbfounded by the news and immediately considered what benefits they could gain. Boogeyman John wasn't a big problem. At most, this person had a bad temper and would kill anyone who pissed him off. But most of those who had pissed him off were dead, and everyone else had yet to provoke him. The real benefits lay in the three parties, namely, Tarasov, Kimura and the fraternity. Who asked them to piss off the boogeyman? Their strength had now dropped significantly. Compared with the lone and tough boogeyman, who offered no advantages, these three organizations had the most that was worth coveting. The special fraternity, from their strong to top fighters, had been completely wiped out in one night. It was like a fat sheep ripe for the taking. How could they call themselves big shots if they didn't cut off several pieces of meat for themselves? For a moment, it looked like something bigger than ever was going to happen at the high table. On the other side, Luke, who had triggered the chaos, had returned home. After speaking with Selena, Luke went to the basement. Taking a deep breath, he pressed the button to modify the system's interface. Was it too heartbreaking to give up the loom of fate for 500,000 credit points? That was impossible. After his recent efforts, he had earned more than 100,000 experience and credit points. Experience and credit points could always be earned. However, there were very few instances when the system's functions could be upgraded. It was clear that only items with magical attributes could catch the system's attention. Naturally, Luke couldn't let these go. After he pressed the button, the system fell silent. Luke sensed that it was still there, but he couldn't use any of its functions. After testing his inventory and the system interface, and finding that they were indeed unavailable, he didn't dwell on it. After tonight, whatever happened next, he would rest for a few days. News of the fraternity being completely annihilated was intimidating enough. Even if the 12 members decided to deal with him, it wouldn't be so soon. 3 prominent members had suffered heavy losses. It was unlikely that the others would be in a hurry to rush out and get themselves killed. Most likely, it would still follow the plan which Luke and Gianna had cooked up beforehand, which was that the blood oath with Santino was never completed. With this excuse, it was possible that Gianna, this resurrected Kimura heir, would be urged to take revenge for her younger brother, or the High Table would directly issue an excommunication and kill order. Of course, none of this would get past Gianna. Luke wasn't in a hurry, and neither was Gianna. The longer this dragged on, the firmer her position as family head would be. Luke had killed a large number of Kimura's men, but they had either been those old coots who relied on their seniority and didn't listen to orders, or men who worked for Santino. Only these people had died, as well as their close bodyguards. The Kimura's real forces hadn't been used at all. Besides, these losses weren't a loss to Gianna. Instead, they would significantly increase her control over the Kimura. After a few months of adjustment, she would only get stronger. As his accomplice, Gianna would share pertinent information with him. With one of the 12 members as his eyes and ears, Luke wasn't afraid of whatever the High Table planned. Even if the High Table couldn't count on Gianna, it would definitely come after John Wick, which had nothing to do with Luke. After taking off the Thousand Faces mask, Luke Coulson was just a diligent NYPD detective. He had little Snail review the operation tonight, and didn't find anything out of place. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down to drink it. The system was being remodeled, and Luke couldn't see the data. But he still remembered his harvest from tonight. There had been 169 regular hitmen, worth 160 experience and credit points per person for a total of 27,100. There had been 18 famous hitmen, worth 1,200 experience and credit points per person for a total of 21,800. Sloan, that old fellow, was different. He alone had provided 30,000 experience and credit points. Based on his own confession, he had probably killed hundreds of people himself, and who knew how many people had been killed after he faked the list of names from the loom. Even though most of them were bad guys, some of them didn't deserve to die, and Sloan had still committed a lot of crimes. However, a human being like him actually had Mephisto's power. Even if it wasn't a lot, it was enough to turn him into a bundle of evil thoughts, so he couldn't be considered human anymore. It wasn't surprising then that he was worth so many experience and credit points. Sloane's abilities were also divided into two parts. Luke basically had everything that human beings could use, like physical outburst and curve shooting. Unsurprisingly, there were the words, evil bestowment, unavailable, on the power from Mephisto. Sloane was thus only worth that amount of points. Now, the host's experience was 54,000/500,000. Credit, 370,100. Host has leveled up to level 17. Strength, 40. Dexterity, 21. Mental strength, 40. Extra stat points, 6. He had leveled up. Sure enough, the high table hadn't let Luke down. In just a month, it had delivered 300,000 experience points to his door and helped him level up. In fact, Luke had only sheared a bit of Kimura fleece, and then slaughtered the fat sheep that was the fraternity. The Continental Hotel had even proactively sent him a pile of wool. He had gotten rid of less than 10% of the power of the 12 members. It was still too early for him to shear all these fat sheep. In addition, Luke had verified the level of his own strength once again. He was only a little more than the best, but far from the bottom. In a head-on battle, it would be practically impossible for him to kill the God of Thunder and the Hulk. The most he could do was retreat. Tony Stark was a little stronger than he was, mostly because of his R&D skills, which was too much of a cheat. His combat ability was also increasing rapidly, but currently, Luke could absolutely deal with him. As for the other Avengers, like Captain America, Iron Patriot, the Black Widow and Hawkeye, they were no threat to Luke. It could even be said that excluding Captain America, who had the 50-50 chance halo, none of the others would be able to last more than a few minutes or even seconds against Luke. Of course, it wasn't that these superheroes were useless, it was just that they weren't solely just fighters. Sif and the Warriors 3 had also mentioned that when Thor went to subdue the 9 realms, he also had to bring elite generals and troops with him. Going into battle alone was too dangerous and inappropriate. As long as infinite clones didn't exist, everyone needed teammates. Even as the thoughts flashed through Luke's mind, he continued to focus on analyzing his strength. He had hundreds of thousands of credit points, and there was nowhere to use them for the time being. All he needed now was the ability to purchase abilities. However, he no longer needed ordinary abilities, he needed abilities with particularly prominent effects in two areas. The first was to put on bulk like crazy. If he bulked up, he would only suffer minor injuries no matter how much he was beat up by someone like the God of Thunder or the Hulk, which would be perfect. He wasn't in a hurry. Ironhide Creech's elementary tempering was waiting for him. Luke would be able to learn it once he met the 80 strength prerequisite. He had blown up Creech's head with a revolver in less than 10 seconds. But Luke also had elementary self-healing and elementary limb regeneration. One made him very strong, and the other allowed him to regenerate constantly. This was no longer a matter of pure strength. If he was further equipped with multiple advantages, like extreme speed, flight, and technological weapons, then, his entire existence would be a cheat. Luke, who prioritized safety, had already considered this route. He would be able to achieve this goal in 2 to 3 years at most, so he didn't need to think too much about it. The second was to deal a tremendous amount of damage. Until now, his strongest output ability was elementary annihilation. It had broken through even the destroyer's defenses. He had developed this ability to be more flexible and readily applicable, so that it could be attached to bullets or cold weapons, or could form a protective shield around his body. But in terms of pure destructive power, it hadn't improved much. Also, this ability could be considered a one-on-one ability. If it was like in the fight against the destroyer, Luke could only put his full strength into each attack a dozen times or so, or his defenses could only hold up to extreme attacks a few times. This wasn't something he could keep up in battle. Elementary annihilation could only be used as a trump card at a critical moment, and couldn't be used as a conventional attack. Elementary telekinesis was even worse in terms of lethality. It could only provide support to deal with unprotected opponents. Similarly, its output didn't match its usage. Rubbing his chin, Luke murmured, "How about elementary sound wave?" Elementary sound wave was the lion's roar used by Stephanie, one of the twins in that trio with superpowers. He had tested this ability a lot after obtaining it. The use of sound waves was common in this day and age, but there were still issues with widespread use and low output. Luke could use it in tandem with Sharp Nose in reconnaissance. He could also use it within a 50-meter range to communicate secret messages, which was what he had used with John Wick. He could also perform ventriloquism with it and mislead the enemy, which was how he had killed Night Wolf and White Dove. As for something like an attack with sound waves, he currently couldn't master this accurately, but there was no need to do so for now. When all was said and done, he had elementary annihilation, this trump card. Elementary telekinesis and elementary sound wave weren't lethal enough, and he still needed to plumb the depths of their potential. What he really lacked was Thor's magic damage, or the sort of extreme brute force which the Hulk had. But there was no way he could deal magic damage in this lifetime. There was no way for him to learn this sort of elemental superpower or even to control electromagnetic charges. No matter how he looked at it, the Hulk's extreme brute force couldn't be worth any less than 100 strength in the system. With every breakthrough of 20 points in strength, the effects were multiplied. He wouldn't stack up on strength for now. After thinking about it, he still had to find a more reliable ability which combined power and continuous output. It was a pity that Tony's Iron Man armor was at most a portable suitcase, and wasn't as convenient as a magical girl's transformation rod. Luke only had a rough idea of the first movie in his memories. He remembered that the Tycoon's metal armor wasn't bad, but it definitely wasn't as convenient as a sparkling transformation. Otherwise, the armor's durability and output could completely make up for the gap in Luke's ability. He had to grab hold of whatever he could get. Thinking that, Luke decided to make use of the information which Gianna had obtained from the high table to gather intelligence on people with super abilities. At the same time, he had to find an opportunity to provoke Tony. The Tycoon was like a bull. If Luke didn't wave a piece of red cloth in front of his face and whip him twice, it would be hard for him to get inspiration. Batman had been resting for several months. It was time to stab this Iron Man in the heart. According to Jenny, not only had Tony Stark transformed Stark Industries into a technology company, he had also decided to relocate his headquarters to New York. In February, this Tycoon would move to New York. A few months prior, Stark Industries had already started constructing a new skyscraper in New York. With money and various technology at their disposal, the top of the building had been reached a month ago, and the CEO's office at the top was already completed. Batman was looking forward to provoking a certain person once the latter arrived. After mulling over this, Luke had Little Snail look up some information as he asked, "Is there a Xavier's School for gifted youngsters near New York?" A school with a similar name or function is fine. If he found the place where mutants gathered, the superpowers would boil over. Little Snail, "Sir, there really isn't." Luke sighed. "What about the people I asked you to keep an eye out for? There are no leads on the bald Charles, the white-haired Aurora, or the blind Scott and the rest." Little Snail, "Sir, nothing like that either. Some people match certain characteristics, but they're traceable and don't show any abnormalities, nor have they been to any place like Xavier's School for gifted youngsters." Luke was disappointed, and then he remembered something, and scratched his head in embarrassment. He had slipped up. He had directed Carol Mira, the girl who had first provided him with elementary self-healing, to New York to look for Xavier's School for gifted youngsters. In the end, he hadn't discovered the existence of this place even after so long, and couldn't even find anyone related to it. Luke didn't dwell on it. He speculated that it was probably because this world wasn't friendly to the mutants, and that Xavier's School for gifted youngsters was hidden well. It was possible that it was operating under another name, and wasn't an academy. Before he created the titanium phone and the multifaceted system, his intelligence abilities had been very lousy. Without enough information, Little Snail wasn't able to use big data to screen suspected targets. In the last few months, titanium phone users had skyrocketed, and so had Luke's sources of information. Luke didn't believe that people who knew about Xavier's school for gifted youngsters wouldn't say anything or leave no clues behind. But the multifaceted system didn't produce any results. So far, he was making a way bigger fuss than the mutants hiding at the school were. After all, this was a living world, not a movie. The people and events here couldn't be exactly like in the movies. But Little Snail suddenly said, "Sir, when I was screening for possible targets, I found Carol Mira." Luke was stunned. "Is it really that Carol?" "Little Snail, it is indeed that Carol Mira." Luke asked, "Where is she?" "Little Snail, she just appeared today in the North Bergen area of New Jersey." Luke immediately got it. Previously, his surveillance had been focused on New York. New Jersey wasn't his territory. Although he paid some attention, he didn't have surveillance cameras there like in New York. He had been going over there a lot in the last few days, and had set up some surveillance cameras at key intersections and locations. Now, Damon and Mindy were busy starting a new life in New Jersey. John Wick was in his custody. The fraternity's number 17 textile mill had been wiped out. He no longer had any surveillance targets in New Jersey, but he had also found an old acquaintance. "Where's Carol staying?" he asked. "Little Snail, judging from the food and daily necessities she bought, the rough range is in North Bergen. Even if it's just a short stint, the food is enough to feed a person for more than a week." Luke nodded, deep in thought. Carol had only shown up today, so she probably wouldn't leave North Bergen for the next few days, unless something happened. Should he go look for her? After thinking about it for a moment, he still decided to pay her a visit. When he first met Carol, he and Selena had just arrived in Houston, and could be said to be poor. They didn't have money, power, or influence. He could only tell Carol that New York had a place that could protect her. The girl had been grateful to him, which had given him elementary self-healing. It wasn't until later that he realized that there was no such place, which was equivalent to giving Carol fake information. If Carol was a bad guy, Luke wouldn't feel guilty at all. But she had been on her own at the time, and had been shot by a Mexican gang. After she survived, S.H.I.E.L.D. targeted her, and she had no choice but to flee to New York. He really felt very apologetic for scamming such an unlucky girl. He wasn't short of money or power right now. He could visit Carol and offer her some help, as easy as anything. There was no need to feel conflicted about it. In the next few days, Luke and Selena took turns reporting to the police department. When Luke was free, he would go to New Jersey on his own. The system was still being remodeled after 5 days, so Luke wasn't in a hurry. The more credit points could be converted from special props, the more time it took to modify the system. Given that the modification this time was worth 500,000 credits, he was prepared to not use his inventory for a week. Luke would check on old friends and look into new cases. He would treat the next few days like a vacation, and it would be over soon. Luke drove leisurely with the windows down. The cold February wind blew, and Luke arrived in North Bergen. He had been here too many times recently, and now had a better understanding of the environment. Little Snail's analysis was also very detailed. Luke didn't have to take the trouble of wandering the areas that Carol would most likely show up in. As long as she wasn't leaving any time soon, it was only a matter of time before he found her. He was very free and wasn't pressed for time, so he went to Palin Academy first and picked up Elena, who was waiting at the entrance. They hadn't met in a while, and Elena seemed to be in a good mood. In the car, Luke said with a smile, "Where's your masterpiece? Are you done?" Elena shook her head. "No, I don't think so. It's only half completed at most." Luke found that odd. So slow. Elena had long known that Luke was indifferent to art, and she never expected that she would fall for someone without the art bug. If it were anyone else, she would have just smiled politely and never interacted with them again. But looking at the lazy and sunny smile of the young man who was driving, she found it impossible to be angry. Instead, she wanted to laugh. "Don't you know that it's very common for a painting to take a few months?" Luke shrugged. "You were so quick to sketch me back then. I only sat for a few minutes, and you, ugh." Elena covered his mouth with a smile. "Swallow it. There are some words you should hold back." Naturally, Luke acquiesced. What he didn't know was that Elena's drawing hadn't been going very smoothly recently. She had initially planned to sketch a few scenes from when she was with Luke, but when her brush moved, she was suddenly inspired and drew a man with a smiling face in a cloak. After drawing this strange masterpiece, she was very sure that she had never seen this person, whether in real life or someone else's work. Even though the smiling man's face and figure were covered, she felt he was familiar. She subconsciously felt that she had probably seen the smiling man in her dream. Now that Luke asked her about her painting, what could she say? That she had wanted to draw him, but had fallen for and sketched someone else instead? She wasn't an idiot. It was better to wait until she figured out this odd thing before she told Luke. She also had to hide that drawing. Making up her mind, she stopped discussing her drawing and asked, "Where are we going?" Luke didn't notice anything. When he was with a friend, he did his best to avoid using mental communication, so that his life wouldn't turn into a police drama. He just suggested, "Do you want to take a look around here and then have a picnic somewhere?" Naturally, Elena was happy to do so. She had been feeling stifled at school for a long time, so coming out would help her relax a little. Actually, as long as Luke was happy to chat with her like this, anywhere they went was fine. They stopped every now and then. North Bergen was close to New York on the south side, and was fairly crowded. The outskirts to the northwest were mostly empty, and was pretty much the wilderness. The weather here was much better than in New York. It was a rainy day, and there were no high-rises in the outskirts. Layers of white clouds stretched out over their heads, giving them a sense of wide open spaces. The scenery here was quite nice for people who had been in a big city for a long time. For example, Elena was looking around with great interest. But for someone like Luke, who had grown up in Texas, this place was nothing. This tiny bit of space was common in Texas, and lacked the desolate and rough air of the Texan wilderness. It also didn't have the charm of livestock or horses. At most, the air here was a little better than in New York. So, Luke took on the task of taking photos while they were out sightseeing. He was using the camera on his titanium phone, which was very suitable for a photo killer like Luke. Elena, on the other hand, had brought a professional camera, and she took photos of landscapes she liked as source material for future works. Naturally, Luke was the one who had given her the camera, in the name of her contribution to the people and the arts. Elena was well aware of the implications. She hit him a few times, but eventually accepted it. When they had been out at sea in Marseilles, Luke had taken a lot of photos under her personal guidance, and the memory cards were still in Luke's inventory. Close to noon, Luke found a place. Dozens of meters away was a supermarket that was hundreds of square meters in size. The two of them had a picnic on the grass opposite the supermarket. He chose this place because it was the supermarket that Carol had visited before, and the only supermarket within a few kilometers of here. It also had a fast food restaurant. This was the most convenient place for residents who wanted to buy stuff or didn't want to cook. The supermarket wasn't crowded, either. Aside from customers who were here to shop, there were few people around. They had a much more authentic picnic here than in the park in New York. They ate slowly and chatted as they ate. They didn't leave after lunch, but sat and rested. Luke marked out the areas he had searched today on his phone. Elena, on the other hand, examined the photos she had taken today and sorted them. She asked Luke's opinion every now and then, and wasn't bored. Suddenly, Luke raised his head and looked at the supermarket not far away. The car's surveillance system sent an alert notification. He saw two young girls enter the fast food restaurant and sit down to order. One of the girls was about 1.55 meters tall and was quite thin. If one didn't look carefully, they would think that she was a child, but it was definitely Carol. Thinking for a moment, Luke said something to Elena, before he walked to the fast food restaurant. He pushed the door open, and the bell over the door rang. It wasn't loud, but was distinct enough. The plump middle-aged waitress at the counter looked over and nodded at him. She didn't have to, but Luke was very nice to look at. It was just like how older women appreciated good looks online. In one corner, Carol's back was to the door, and she didn't notice Luke. The girl faced the door and looked at Luke warily when she heard the bell. She felt that Luke was just a handsome and bright boy, and looked away. Luke walked over unhurriedly, and sat down under the girl's astonished expression. His movements didn't look fast, but they were smooth and natural. Before Carol could react, someone had sat down next to her. She quickly turned around and was stunned. "You." Luke smiled. "Hello, Carol. It's been a while." Carol looked at him in disbelief. "Luke? Why are you here?" Luke chuckled. "I'm on a picnic with a friend. I was right across the street. I thought I was seeing things when I saw you." Carol was still surprised. What a coincidence. She didn't notice that the girl had become even more vigilant. Luke, however, had long noticed it. After all, he was a detective. The girl had the look of a criminal fugitive or an unlucky bee starred with debtors on her heels. She looked ready to explode at any moment. He simply stretched out his hand with a smile. "Nice to meet you. You can call me Luke." The girl hesitated, but still shook his hand without giving her name. Only then did Carol sense that the atmosphere was strange, and she explained to the girl in a low voice, "Luke is my friend. He helped me a lot. Also, he knows about me." The girl was stunned for a moment, before she dropped her guard, but she still didn't say anything. Luke didn't think much of it. "Carol and I haven't seen each other in a while. If you don't mind, the two of us can catch up on the side first." The girl frowned. Carol, however, didn't hesitate. She took Luke's hand and smiled at him. "It's fine. I trust him." They sat down in another corner of the fast food restaurant. A waitress had just cleaned up the table next to them, and she asked casually, "What would you like?" Luke said, "A cup of coffee." "How about you?" Carol said, "Hot chocolate." The waitress nodded and left with her notebook. A moment later, the coffee and hot chocolate arrived, and Luke paid for them. As they sat opposite each other, Carol couldn't help but ask, "Are you here for me?" Luke said, "I transferred to NYPD at the end of last year, and I'm on an outing with my girlfriend." Carol couldn't help but look out the window, and could vaguely see Elena. She was a little disappointed as she looked away, but then realized that she had been overthinking it. The world was so big, and she and Luke didn't have any special relationship. Why would he look for her? Luke, however, said, "I'm sorry, Carol." She was stumped for a moment. "Why?" Luke scratched his head. "I checked a lot of information after I came here, but I didn't find Xavier's school for gifted youngsters." Stunned, Carol burst out laughing. "That's it?" Luke said, "You look fine now, but I pointed you in the wrong direction." "I'm sorry." Carol immediately shook her head. "No, without you, I would have been caught a long time ago. Also, your reminders helped me avoid a lot of danger. I must thank you." Luke was relieved. At least he hadn't dragged the girl down. Thinking that, he couldn't help but smile happily. "Then how are you now?" After a brief hesitation, Carol nodded. "I'm all right." How could she hide her uncertain expression and tone from a detective? Luke frowned. "You're in serious trouble." As he spoke, he glanced at the girl, who was secretly paying attention to them. She threatened you. Carol was shocked. She remembered how Luke had sent her flying with a kick in Houston. She didn't think that he was as harmless as he appeared. Also, she was well aware that Luke was a detective. She didn't want to mess with government people. It was only because Luke had let her go once and had helped her escape that she trusted him. She shook her head quickly and leaned in close. She's my partner. That kind of partner, you understand? Luke calmed down. He had seen plenty of people with superpowers, so it didn't matter if another one appeared. He simply nodded. I won't ask her what's going on. I just want to know what trouble you're in. Tell me, and I'll take care of it for you. Carol's eyes widened. She suddenly felt that she didn't recognize the boy anymore. Looking at her expression, Luke was amused. I gave you the wrong information last time, and I feel uncomfortable if I don't make up for it. So, tell me, as long as you're not a terrorist, I'll do my best to help. Carol's face darkened, and she didn't say anything. Luke asked suspiciously, you didn't really join some terrorist organization, did you? If that really did happen, he would arrest her and the girl without hesitation. It was fine if they didn't kill innocents, but if they acted against civilians, he couldn't let them go. Carol immediately shook her head. And no. She raised her head, only to see Luke frowning at her. She panicked and said in a low voice, we're not doing anything. We've just been running. But the people who want to catch us said that we're terrorists, and have been chasing us. Luke turned serious and finally activated elementary pheromone control. He regarded Carol as a friend. At the very least, those who had given him their abilities out of gratitude could be considered friends. Also, Carol hadn't done anything bad before she escaped, which was why Luke hadn't used this ability so far. But now, he needed a concrete answer. Are you telling me the truth? He asked softly. Carol immediately replied, yes. Luke asked, the girl over there hasn't done anything bad either. Carol hesitated, before she said in a low voice, at least, after she saved me, I don't think she's bad, except. Except what? Luke immediately asked. Carol lowered her head. We saved some of our comrades. While we were escaping, she used her ability and injured some of the people who wanted to catch us. Luke asked, did she kill anyone? Carol shook her head quickly. No, she just injured them. I didn't see anyone die. Luke chuckled inwardly. I have a knee breaker at home who can keep a man alive after destroying all 5 of their limbs. However, under elementary pheromone control, Carol's words were very trustworthy. He stopped feeling conflicted and changed the topic. So what problem have you run into now? Carol said, it's just that people from Sentinel Services have been looking for us, and want to put us in a special prison. Luke narrowed his eyes. Sentinel Services? Do they specialize in catching people like you? Carol nodded and trembled a little. She couldn't help but hug herself in fear. Yes. I also heard that they perform experiments on people like us after they catch us. It'll be worse than death. Luke wasn't surprised to hear that. Although Phil Coulson didn't say it outright, it was clear that this country wasn't very friendly towards superhumans. SHIELD would take action if superhumans were detected, and FLEG's Joint Advanced Research Unit would also come to arrest them. Now that this Sentinel Services or whatever had shown up, it wasn't a surprise. Pondering for a moment, he asked, so, you're hiding? Carol nodded. Luke said, have you ever tried hiding overseas? Somewhere like Mexico, Canada, or Venezuela? Carol shook her head quickly. No. I heard that those places are even more dangerous. Here, those people still worry about exposing themselves, but elsewhere, we could die and nobody would know. Luke nodded and thought for a moment before he asked, if I can help you go into hiding, will your partner be willing to go with you? Carol subconsciously looked at the girl and said, I don't know. Lorna's a little stubborn. Actually, that was an understatement. The girl called Lorna had a stubborn temper. Carol wasn't confident she could convince her to accept Luke's help. Luke, on the other hand, was confident, but he needed to make sure that she was worth helping. Although Carol said that Lorna hadn't killed any innocent people, that only proved that she hadn't seen it for herself. As an outstanding representative of the school of acting, Luke didn't really believe in this sort of surface impression. For example, the number of people he killed in other people's view and in reality were two different things, but how many people knew it? Picking up his coffee, he nodded. "Let's go. I'll talk to her." Carol hurriedly followed him with her hot chocolate. When the two of them returned, Lorna looked away. She took a sip of her juice and pretended that she was just focused on her food. However, when she saw Carol following behind the boy, she felt uncomfortable, like a little girl whose playmate had been kidnapped. While she was feeling depressed, Luke put down his coffee and sat down opposite her to observe her. She had long, straight, curly black hair and perfect lips. Her eyes were deep and big under her thick eyebrows. Her nose was straight and her forehead was smooth. There was a saying, girls who exposed their foreheads had good looks. This girl wasn't just pretty, she had outstanding looks. She had beautiful features, which were nothing like the cheap looks of online celebrities. The heavens had definitely put in a lot of effort to make this face. Praising her inwardly, Luke said, "Let me officially introduce myself. Luke Coulson." Lorna nodded coldly. "Lorna, but I believe Carol would have already told you." Carol was a little embarrassed. After all, Lorna had said that they needed to keep their situation secret. Luke's smile didn't waver. "All right, Lorna. I have some idea of your problem, and I can help you resolve it, but I would like to know if you've hurt innocent passers-by with your ability." Hearing the question, Lorna immediately got up and was about to leave. But before she could move, she heard herself obediently reply, "No, we just don't want to be caught." Only then did she get up. Lorna was suddenly stunned. "What's going on? Why did I reply?" The smile still on his face, Luke said, "Lorna, calm down and sit down, okay? Carol is my friend. I trust her, but you and I are meeting for the first time, so it makes sense for me to confirm it, right?" Lorna was about to flare up again, but she immediately sat down. Why did I listen to him? Why did I sit down? Her mind was in a mess. Luke chuckled inwardly. This girl was 15 or 16 at most, and was in the middle of her sophomore year. Regular kids spent most of their sophomore year bickering with their parents and picking up bad habits. After all that, she still had to deal with being chased by Sentinel services. Living like that, it was normal for her to be sensitive and angry. The three girls with extraordinary abilities whom Luke had hidden in New Jersey had been in the same situation, and had even attempted to break out a prisoner. It was hard to avoid these problems with children who had lost their ordinary homes and school life. After confirming that she hadn't killed anyone with her ability, Luke turned more lenient. "The problem you're facing isn't really a big deal." He took a sip of his coffee. Putting down the cup, he continued, "I'll help you avoid those people. You have enough time to think about it. In the future, you can be an ordinary person, or do whatever you want." Lorna's rebellious attitude surfaced again. "You think you can deal with Sentinel services? How? Do you have some sort of powerful ability? Most problems in this world can be solved with money. If you can't solve them, it's usually because you don't have enough money." Luke took another sip of his coffee as he recalled this saying. So, he raised his head and looked at Lorna with a smile. "As for my ability, I have money." She choked. As a child who grew up in America, whether it was daily living or some American dream, it all came down to one word, money. It was like when someone made it big, most people's first reaction would be to ask, "How much did you make?" If success was given a ranking, the best was the kind where you made money. Money that you earned dishonestly was still one type of success in this country. Even if many people didn't think that money was everything, basically everyone knew that money was God here. Unwilling to give up, Lorna rallied. Are you rich? Millions or tens of millions? Do you think that's enough? Hee, why didn't you say that you're Tony Stark? Luke was amused. I'm not Tony Stark. Lorna chuckled and felt that she had gained the upper hand. Luke said, but tens of millions really is nothing to me. Also, I'm a hidden shareholder of Stark Industries, Luke secretly added in his heart. Lorna, what? She then looked at Carol suspiciously, as if to say, you never told me that you know a super magnate. Someone for whom tens of millions was nothing had to be worth at least $1 billion. With his wealth, there really was no need for him to fear Sentinel services. Money. There were too many things you could do in America if you had money. Carol, who was watching the show, quickly replied with an expression that said, I don't know anything. Luke coughed and said, there's no need to doubt it. I know you and Carol have talent, and I have a rough idea of the kind of people you're facing. They're indeed troublesome, but as long as you spend tens of millions, countless mercenaries will risk their lives to protect you. Unless they also use someone with talent to ambush you, they won't be able to do anything to you. Lorna's lips parted, as if she wanted to retort, but she had nothing to say. Tens of millions. Many mercenaries would be willing to work for just millions. Luke, however, waved his hand. This method is too clumsy, and may trigger problems later, so I'll make other plans. How about this, I'll send my girlfriend back first, and I'll look for you later. Carol, do you have a phone? Carol shook her head. We don't dare carry phones. They can be traced easily. We don't have many people we need to contact. Luke subconsciously reached into his coat, only to be embarrassed. The system modification wasn't complete, and he couldn't take anything out of his inventory. How about this? Give me a location, and I'll pick you up at 8 tonight, said Luke. The two girls looked at each other. Naturally, Carol had no objections. She trusted Luke, and could only implore the stubborn Lorna to agree. After hesitating for a few seconds, Lorna finally said, there's a gas station 200 meters away. With that, she turned around and refused to look at Luke, like the typical spoiled girl. Amused, Luke nodded. It's settled then. Meet me at 8 tonight. See you then. He then nodded at Carol to reassure her, before he left the fast food restaurant. The two girls in the fast food restaurant looked out the window. The man walked over to the grass dozens of meters away and said something to the girl there. Then, they packed up and left in the car. It wasn't until the SUV disappeared into the trees that Lorna turned to look at Carol. He's not your boyfriend? Carol was stunned. How is that possible? We're not. We're just friends. She almost said, we're not close, but managed to switch her words at the last minute. Lorna was suspicious. But you trust him so much. No, not just trust him. I think you would dumbly agree if he told you to turn yourself in. Carol was a little embarrassed, but still argued in a low voice, he saved me twice. He didn't know me then, but he knew I wasn't bad. He's a good guy. Without a stranger like Luke around, and given that Carol didn't have a forceful personality, Lorna's rebellious heart automatically disappeared, and her mindset returned to normal. Thinking for a moment, she said, is that why he asked me if I've done anything bad? Carol nodded and quickly added, he asked me the same thing. Mona was surprised. He doubted you. To describe Carol nicely, she was pure and kind-hearted. To put it badly, she was dumb and weak. How could Luke be suspicious of her? For a moment, Lorna's impression of Luke improved. At the very least, it proved that he hadn't been targeting her with his questions, and that it was just part of his nature. She wanted to continue asking about Luke, but she remembered that this wasn't the place to talk, so she got up and said, let's go back. Walking out of the fast food restaurant and down an empty path, Lorna asked, why does he care so much about us doing something bad? Carol replied without thinking, because he's a police detective. Lorna was shocked. Police? Why didn't you tell me? No, we have to go. We can't count on people like that. He might let those people know, and they'll come after us. Carol stopped her helplessly. Although Lorna was almost 20 centimeters taller than her, Carol had the absolute advantage in terms of physical strength. Lorna almost staggered. What are you doing? Carol said, he won't arrest us. Lorna was unconvinced. She had never met anyone who didn't want to capture them, unless they didn't know their identities. When most people learned that they had superpowers, they wanted them gone, and the easiest way was to get those agencies to come and secretly capture them. Carol then started to pull her along. I met Luke in Houston in 2003. He was a detective with the Major Crimes Division. A moment later, after listening to Carol's explanation, Lorna finally relaxed. From Carol's description, Luke had long known about superhumans. He let Carol go, and even gave her money to escape. Earlier, he had noticed Carol first. If he really wanted to let those people know, he wouldn't have needed to go and talk to the two of them or alert them. That made no sense. Had she really run into a good person? Lorna was full of doubts. It wasn't because she was paranoid, but in all these years, she had never met anyone who could treat them calmly and normally. On the other side, Elena curiously asked Luke about Carol and Lorna. Luke simply said that he knew the short girl because of a case, but he had never seen the other girl before. Elena stopped asking. In any case, she wasn't asking these questions because the tall girl was too pretty. After making one round around the supermarket, Luke sent Elena back to the college, returned home, and went to his workshop to look for information on Sentinel services. Very soon, Little Snail found the relevant information. The reason why it was so fast was because the information was so scant it was only made up of a few messages. Looking at the handful of messages, Luke knew that this information was from superhumans. From how Carol and Mona didn't carry phones on them, it was clear that both superhumans and Sentinel services were equally secretive. Except for that lunatic Kilgrave, who acted brazenly under Kingpin's protection, smart superhumans kept a low profile. There were indeed many organizations in this world that hid in the dark and captured superhumans for research. From Carol and her partner's words, Sentinel services wasn't anything good, or they wouldn't be so scared when they mentioned it. These messages which mentioned Sentinel services were also quickly deleted. Clearly, someone was deliberately removing this information from the internet. There had definitely been more information online about Sentinel services before, but Luke hadn't paid special attention to it. This was only from the backup information samples which the multifaceted system created as per its usual practice. Now, Luke placed keywords related to Sentinel services as the top priority, along with pertinent information related to superhumans. From now on, as long as this information appeared on the internet, the multifaceted system would immediately preserve it. It wouldn't be long before a lot of clues appeared. In an age of information, it was the hardest in the beginning when looking for someone. Once a key search factor was nailed down, however, it was impossible for anyone to hide completely. Even Luke would find it hard to sneak out and cause trouble if he was monitored 24/7, so he had always kept a low profile. Sentinel services wasn't a big deal. Luke didn't think much of this secret department. What he wanted was information on superhumans. Whether it was superhumans who had been caught or information on them, it was an opportunity for him to bulk up his list of abilities. Also, he was confident that he was quicker at finding people than Sentinel services. It was unlikely that Sentinel services was more skilled than Tony Stark. They didn't have the ability to make a scientist like him, who was like a son of destiny, work for them. Otherwise, they would have been able to catch superhumans as soon as they appeared. Carol and Lorna wouldn't have been able to escape at all. Luke had arranged to meet Carol and Lorna at 8 o'clock, but he already had a rough idea of their whereabouts. Unless Lorna's ability was to open a portal or fly fast, it was impossible for them to completely escape surveillance cameras. He already had a plan for the two girls. Carol wasn't an ambitious person. If she really wanted to lead a normal life, she could wear the Thousand Faces mask and change her identity. But from Luke's brief contact with Lorna, he could tell that this teenage girl was tempestuous. It was very likely that she hadn't even considered her future yet. The Supergirl trio had been training for months. Luke had already registered a shell company, which in turn had bought a small record company. Things like getting an agent could be sorted out later, but Stephanie was already ready to release a single. Under Luke's tutelage, this girl with elementary sound wave could use her voice to its fullest. For her, vocal technique was nothing, what was important was feelings, or the ability to steal hearts. But was this that big a deal when she already had looks and singing talent? Obviously not. Being able to steal hearts was an ability which a top singer needed. However, Stephanie had yet to even release one single, and would need to climb her way to the top step by step. It wasn't too late to revisit this issue again 10 years later. He would have to check on the three girls again soon. They would have two more junior sisters, if the latter met all the requirements. Of course, Carol was already 21, and could be considered a big sister. However, with her 1.55-meter height, thin frame, and weak personality, she probably wouldn't be able to be the boss. If each of the 5 girls got a Thousand Faces mask and a new identity, they could start a new life. Stars would naturally draw attention, but ordinary C and D-list stars were effectively hiding out in the open. Besides, not all of them could become stars, everybody else could just work as staff members. Once they became a little more well-known, they could set up a security team and block out snoops in an open and just manner. The security team would be able to take care of any problems, which was in line with how celebrities did things. Sentinel services wouldn't pay attention to these sorts of minor celebrities, and security would stop them from making outright contact. That way, even though the girls were in the spotlight, they were hiding in the open. Also, he would cut off their information channels so that they wouldn't know each other's real backgrounds. For example, the singer Stephanie might have a good relationship with her assistant Carol, and Lion's Roar Stephanie might know the superhuman Carol. However, the singer and assistant wouldn't know that the other party had superpowers, and the two superhumans wouldn't know that the other party was actually their singer or assistant. In the future, even if something happened to one half of this 3+2 combination, they wouldn't be able to reveal information on the other half. He could also expand the company into an entertainment company and make it a little bigger so that there would be a lot of staff and constant movement. The people the entertainment company interacted with would also be very complicated and difficult to monitor, which would make it an even better hiding place for the girls. Rubbing his chin, Luke couldn't help but laugh. Thinking about it, opening a company seemed like fun. Even better, money could be used to sort out everything in this company. Money was indeed the most convenient ability for him. After considering everything, Luke got to work. He had already collected and confirmed the opinions of the 3 girls, and was now making their Thousand Faces masks. He would wait to see what Carol and Lorna wanted. Who knew, maybe Lorna wanted to change the color of her skin. Thinking this, Luke felt like laughing. The good weather lasted throughout the day. There were no clouds in the sky, and the crescent moon cast a dim light. As usual, Luke didn't drive his own car, but a pickup that had nothing to do with him. Similarly, he wasn't using his own face. Tonight, he wasn't Luke, but a professional who had accepted payment from an anonymous client to sort out Carol and Lorna's identities. Luke was rich, and should act like it when necessary. He had bragged too much in front of that rebellious girl. It wouldn't be easy to intimidate her if he wasn't convincing enough. Suddenly, there was the sound of rumbling. Luke casually switched functions on the fake phone which had been propped up on the dashboard, and a notification came through his wireless earpiece. 2 helicopters are flying over from the east. He was headed from the south to the north, on roughly the same route as the 2 helicopters. But he didn't think too much of it, even if the 2 helicopters were a little quieter than regular ones. There were too many helicopters around here. It wasn't unusual for wealthy residents in New Jersey to take a helicopter to New York for work. He continued driving, but a bunch of Ford SUVs soon appeared behind him. They were black and looked like a convoy. The convoy, which was made up of 7 cars, moved very fast. It passed Luke's pickup at lightning speed. Narrowing his eyes, Luke operated his fake phone and pulled up the surveillance feed near where Carol and her partner were staying. He had taken a detour before he sent Elena back at noon, and had set up surveillance cameras at various exit points, just in case. Thinking that, he extended his hand out of habit, and nothing happened. Stumped for a moment, he then smiled bitterly and reached into his pocket to take out a black mask and a pair of gloves. His inventory was too convenient. It had been a long time since he had really taken out something to cover his face. Thankfully, he had been carrying them on him in case he needed them. While it wasn't a big deal if anyone saw his face, wearing a black hood was easier than handling his real identity. Putting on the mask and gloves, Luke hit the gas and sped up. Soon, he heard faint voices on the wind. They weren't cries for help, but simple orders and reports from a team. He hit the brake and parked the car under a tree. Getting out of the car, he looked at the 2 helicopters hovering in the sky with searchlights on, and narrowed his eyes. Sure enough, they were a bunch of fakes. Phil and Flegg, for example, mostly used their FBI aliases when they were out and about, which meant that while their mission was important, they still communicated with the FBI. These 2 helicopters didn't have any logos or even serial numbers on them. They were just black all over. Clearly, they didn't plan on letting anyone know their identities. That shouldn't be underestimated. No logos meant that if eyewitnesses reported it, nothing could be clearly explained, and neither the police nor the FBI would be able to investigate the matter. Thinking that, Luke quickly headed for the area above which the helicopters were hovering. There was an old house amidst the underbrush in the woods. Carol and Lorna might have been hiding there. Activating elementary concealment, Luke moved through the shadows and soon reached the back of a man in a black combat uniform. That person was in a row with his comrades as they pressed forward like a comb through the grass to prevent the target from fleeing through the bushes. When the man passed by a tree, a hand reached out from the side and grabbed his neck. His helmet was taken off and he was punched in the back of his head. In less than 10 seconds, Luke walked out in the black combat uniform and replaced the guy. If the other men in black combat uniforms were closer, they would notice that he had much less equipment on him. The bulletproof helmet and upper half of the combat uniform had been put on sloppily, while his pants and shoes were in a similar color. Luke checked his submachine gun and clips as he walked. The weight of the submachine gun wasn't right, and most of it felt like it was made of plastic. What was even stranger was that the barrel didn't feel like metal. What was in the clips weren't ordinary bullets either. As someone who liked to play with tranquilizers, he immediately confirmed that these were tranquilizer darts. This was very rare. Tranquilizer guns were very common. They looked like rifles, and it wasn't surprising if they were smaller in size. However, a tranquilizer submachine gun was clearly for tracking. It was a cover, and the target had to be captured alive. A lot of effort had been put into the equipment to catch those with superpowers. A bunch of men in black combat uniforms were out here in the middle of the night to arrest Carol and her partner. This had to be Sentinel Services, right? While Luke was pondering, he heard a voice in his earpiece. 2 females detected. The targets for the operation have been confirmed. They're fleeing north. Follow them. Luke jumped lightly and climbed almost 10 meters up a tree and looked to the north. 100 meters away, 2 girls darted through the trees under the searchlights, and couldn't escape Luke's sharp sight. It was indeed Carol and Lorna. He had smelled them earlier, and was completely certain that the helicopters and the team were here for them. Tilting his head, Luke smiled behind his mask. Let me see what Sentinel Services is like. The system hadn't responded when Luke knocked out the soldier earlier and stole his equipment. He didn't receive any sort of reminder, whether it was earning experience points or deducting credit points. Clearly, the system couldn't spare him any energy while it was being modified. Just in case, he wouldn't kill anyone today. But looking at the tranquilizer gun in his hand, he smiled happily. Look, what a considerate person. The next moment, he disappeared. In the meantime, Carol and Lorna were in danger. The two helicopters were flying high in the sky, and were made with special materials to deal with Lorna's superpower. If she wanted to pull the helicopters down, she would have to focus on activating her abilities. However, more than 30 men in black combat uniforms were approaching quickly. If she didn't move, they would notice her and use a huge amount of special tranquilizers to subdue her. It would be tricky for her to deal with the Sentinel Services soldiers. Their equipment was also specially made. They didn't contain any metal parts, but porcelain segments. Ordinary attacks wouldn't be able to damage them. Especially in the current situation, it was impossible for her to focus on attacking them. Carol was no longer as timid as before. Her thin frame was now bent very low, like a wild cat about to attack, and she had a vigilant expression on her face. Suddenly, she said, "Lorna, I'll distract them. You go first." Lorna refused right away. "No, we'll charge out together." Carol, however, was calm. "No, they're too well prepared this time. I won't be able to escape the choppers, but you can escape by flying for a short while. As long as you reach the pier in the north, there's a lot of metal there, and they won't be able to do anything to you." Mona still refused. "It's only 2 kilometers. We'll charge out together. This time. I won't show them any mercy." As she spoke, 2 metal table knives floated up from her hands. Carol said, "No. We're not bad guys, we're not criminals. Also, if we kill them, they'll send more people after us." Lorna said unwillingly, "But we're about to be caught." Carol asked, "What if they catch even just one of us?" Lorna opened her mouth, but couldn't say anything. If she went on a killing spree, and one or both of them were caught, they would be tortured harshly. Also, it was likely that Carol would be caught tonight. The 2 girls had extraordinary abilities but lacked courage and experience, and were caught in a dilemma. But soon, they wouldn't have to worry about it anymore. Pa! Pa! 2 very clear gunshots rang out, and the lights of the helicopters died. Both parties were stunned. Overjoyed, Carol said in a low voice without hesitation, "Let's go." They charged north in the dark. Carol was as lithe as a cat as she jumped through the bushes. Then, she lunged forward and kicked a man in a black combat uniform in the chest, sending him flying 7 to 8 meters. He rolled a few times before he stopped. Pushing off of her feet, she twisted in the air and kicked another soldier 5 meters away. An escape route thus appeared. Following behind Carol, Lorna flew 5 to 6 meters with every step she took, as if she was almost weightless. She wasn't as fast as Carol, but she wasn't affected by the terrain. The 2 girls fled without any hesitation. Sentinel Services had already caught several of their comrades. They didn't have the courage or determination to fight, and could only find an opportunity to run. Thus, the 2 girls missed the show behind them. After 2 gunshots, the commander's voice rang out in Luke's earpiece. "Be careful, they have guns." The corners of Luke's mouth curled up as he pulled the safety pins on several round objects before he threw them out around him. With Luke's strength, precision and speed, the stun grenades exploded in the middle of the soldiers in 2 seconds. Several clouds of smoke and blinding flashes appeared in the dark wilderness. Luke even heard some of the soldiers wail and curse like beaten dogs. Luke decisively raised the tranquilizer gun and darted into the smoke. Pooh! 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 The tranquilizers were practically soundless and clearly didn't have as much force as normal bullets, but it was good enough for Carol and Lorna. It was also enough for a certain someone who was practically undefeatable in a gunfight within a 10-meter range. As the smoke from the grenade spread, Luke charged in and darted the soldiers right in the necks. He used the first-rate tranquilizer gun just like a syringe. As Luke pressed forward and darted the soldiers, he didn't forget to grab 1 or 2 smoke grenades off the criminals. He removed the safety pins and threw them out. The panic-stricken combat soldiers began to retreat, only to find themselves surrounded by smoke. Although they had gas masks on to avoid tears blurring their vision, their line of sight was still severely affected. Retreat, and stay alert. The bald commander sitting in the helicopter reacted quickly. But even as he gave the order, Luke had already taken down 4 or 5 soldiers. The remaining 20 men followed orders and retreated. When they exited the area that was completely covered in smoke, smoke grenades flew out at the squad like precision missiles to envelop them again. Amidst the smoke, the commander heard the sound of tranquilizer darts, but couldn't hear his men anymore. Looking at the smoke, the bald commander in the helicopter gritted his teeth and ordered, "Go," to the pier in the north. The pilot hesitated. "The people down there," the bald commander said, "they were probably hit with the darts. The assailant doesn't want to kill them. We'll come back later to get them. Let's go to the pier first and see if B team can capture the 2 targets." The pilot had only asked the question reflexively. He didn't dare disobey the order, and immediately turned the helicopter north. Luke's ears twitched. Thanks to his elementary sound wave and sharp hearing, he roughly heard the conversation between the bald commander and the pilot. Watching the 2 helicopters leave quickly, Luke smiled mockingly as he swiftly collected the combat soldiers' equipment. Without his inventory, he could only use whatever he could get his hands on. Carol and Lorna ran like animals who were being hunted. Tense, they fled to the pier, but had no idea that a second trap was waiting for them. Just as they were feeling excited and relaxed when they saw the pier 100 meters away, the trap activated. At that moment, they had just entered an empty clearing near the pier, when more than 10 people suddenly stood up. They instantly tore off the camouflage on their heads and straightened up, like groundhogs popping out of hiding, and tranquilizer darts flew from all directions. Carol, who was running in the front, reacted quickly. Pushing off of her feet, she managed to dodge the attack from the front, but 3 darts still hit her in the back. In just 2 seconds, she felt her body go numb and her vision go blurry. Lorna, who was a little behind, was completely unprepared. She was about to jump, but was hit by 5 darts, and collapsed. "Cease fire," someone shouted. "Medic, go and give target 1 first aid. She has too much of the drug in her system, which will affect experiments later." Carol struggled to raise her head. Her elementary self-healing was resistant to sedatives, but after 3 consecutive shots, she had lost most of her strength. It would take a few minutes for her body to neutralize the sedative, but these people wouldn't give her the chance. The other side had a fair amount of information on the 2 women. 2 of them went up to stop her struggling, and put a restraining device on her which bound her hands and feet. Although she had more strength than an ordinary person, it was useless in the face of such a professional device for restraining physical strength. "Sir, B team has successfully caught targets 1 and 2. The person who had shouted earlier contacted the bald commander. Carol was devastated. By the time the dozens of soldiers arrived, they would have no hope of escaping. What should I do? What should I do? Her mind was in a mess as she searched for a way to escape. Wait, Luke. Luke hasn't come, he'll definitely save us. Then, she had another thought, Luke hadn't shown up, but the people from Sentinel Services were here. Was it him? Could it be that he? No, he wouldn't. He wouldn't sell me out. Irrational or not, Carol didn't believe Luke would sell her out. But the appearance of Sentinel Services tonight was really too coincidental. It was around 7:50 p.m., which was close to 8 o'clock. Sentinel Services had surrounded and ambushed them. It looked like they had been planning this for a long time, and had just been waiting for the women to fall into their trap. Under the influence of the sedative and filled with all sorts of doubts, Carol's thoughts ran wild in this desperate situation. 2 minutes later, 2 helicopters landed not far away. The bald commander got off and quickly checked the 2 women. After confirming that they were the targets of this operation, he waved his hand. "Put them in the chopper. I'll take them right away." As he spoke, he walked to the helicopter. "They have accomplices in the rear. We don't know how many, but they're combat experts. You have to be careful." Swoosh! 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 There was the faint sound of rushing wind, and the bald commander suddenly had a bad feeling. He looked over and saw a few familiar round objects flying into the open area that was lit up. Bang! 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 It was the same familiar pattern and smell. The bald commander was wearing protective goggles, and while he wasn't blinded, he still couldn't help but feel like crying. F***CK. You're still here. Half of the flash and smoke grenades were set off and enveloped the dozen or so combat soldiers. It was over. The bald commander was full of even more despair than Carol. There had been over 30 people on the other side earlier, and in less than 10 seconds, there had no longer been any movement from them. There were only a dozen people here. What hope was there? Even more unluckily, he had tried to save time by getting the helicopters to land and immediately take the targets away. Who would have thought that the other party would be as fast as the helicopter? They followed behind and attacked. Luke was very considerate. After taking care of the dozen or so team members, he darted the commander as well. Eyes bloodshot, the bald commander slowly collapsed. Luke walked out of the smoke and picked up the bald commander. After examining him for a moment, he threw him into the helicopter. He then walked over to Carol and examined the restraints on her for a moment, before he picked her up and carried her back to Lorna, who had collapsed on the ground. There was too much of the drug in Lorna's system. She wasn't in any danger, but she was still unconscious. Luke connected his fake phone to the special restraining device and then dragged the bald commander's hand over for his fingerprint. 2 green indicators on the restraining device lit up. With a light crack, Carol's limbs were released. Luke tore the device off Carol and threw it out of the helicopter, before he took off the gear he and the bald commander were wearing, and threw them out as well. Then, he took photos of the faces of the 10 or so combat soldiers on the scene. He then walked over to the pilot's seat and threw out the unconscious pilot. He started the helicopter and quickly took off. He left behind in the clearing next to the pier the soldiers, who lay in a haphazard heap. It looked like the scene of a massacre. On the helicopter, Carol, who had gradually recovered, looked at Luke nervously. She finally couldn't help but ask, "Why did you save us?" Luke said, "For money." Carol was confused. "Huh?" Luke said, "Someone coughed up $10 million to help sort out protection for you in the future. That's not bad." Carol was petrified. 10 million. Of course, Luke couldn't waste the story he had made up. He continued, "What, you think it's too little?" Before Carol could shake her head and deny it, he said, "It's indeed too little. Your ability is very valuable to some people, and your partner's ability might be even rarer. Based on those 50 soldiers alone, I think the mission is worth 100 million. Carol was dumbfounded. 100 million. She did all sorts of odd jobs and would be lucky if she could make $20,000 a year, but this masked man in front of her actually said that she and Lorna were worth 100 million. Was she that valuable now? Shocked beyond anything, she got out of the helicopter and followed Luke for another kilometer before getting into a car. After the car was some distance away, she remembered something. She looked at Lorna and the bald commander in the back seat through the rearview mirror, and hesitated. Knowing what she was thinking, Luke said, "Your friend is fine. She'll be all right after a nap." Carol asked, and the guy?" Luke asked, "The baldy. I need information from him. I need to know who's after you before I can thoroughly make sure you're no longer hunted." Carol murmured, They're probably from Sentinel Services. Luke nodded and said, "Now that we have time, tell me everything you know. If it's a small organization, it'll be easy." Carol was stumped. "Huh? Easy?" Luke said, "If it doesn't have a lot of people, we can destroy everything, and they won't be able to make trouble for you in the next few months." Carol was dumbstruck once again. She had never expected such an answer. This was Sentinel Services, a terrifying department that specialized in dealing with people with superpowers. It was said that the American government was behind it. Thinking that, she told him everything she knew. Sentinel Services was probably a secret organization for dealing with people with superpowers who were threats. Of course, Luke felt that this was just a surface excuse to fob off the people at the top. Carol told him more about the superhumans whom she had rescued from Sentinel Services. She said that they had been locked up in a secret research base and used as test subjects. Also, Sentinel Services had captured a lot of superhumans, and very few were able to reappear after that. Carol had only learned all this after she and Lorna broke into the research base and saved some superhumans. After that incident, she and Lorna were targeted. The people whom they had rescued either left on their own or were caught one after another. Now, Carol and Lorna were the only ones still on the run. Luke could only sigh at what they had done. This was a matter of life and death. How could they just do as they pleased? They had to prepare beforehand, and have contingency plans for how to attack, retreat and cover their whereabouts. They had to make even more arrangements in the aftermath. At the very least, they should have considered how to hide and avoid capture as well as how to safeguard everyone in the future. Clearly, Lorna and her companions hadn't considered these questions clearly before they attacked. They were a bunch of hot-blooded and brainless kids. When they felt that they had to be loyal, they went to save them, and in the end, all of them got dragged in. But Luke couldn't act high and mighty and look down on them. What could these kids do? Apart from their own superpowers, they didn't have money or influence, nor were they capable of planning and cleaning up after themselves. Even if they didn't save them, that was just delaying their own capture. Given its overwhelming power and financial resources, Sentinel Services wouldn't lose at all. However, since Sentinel Services relied on money and power to bully Carol and Lorna, Luke could also use them to bully Sentinel Services in turn. If the other party was S.H.I.E.L.D., he would be a little more restrained. That was because S.H.I.E.L.D. was a secret from the public but a known entity among the higher-ups. It had close ties to the American government. If it was attacked, it wouldn't just be S.H.I.E.L.D. itself that was provoked, but also the various police departments and the FBI. Sentinel Services was different. After a simple analysis of what Carol said, Luke concluded that this was probably a secret project by some big shots. A serious problem with this sort of secret organization was that they didn't dare be exposed. With someone to protect them, they could bypass law and order, and privately capture superhumans for experiments in the name of law enforcement. However, they could only do this in secret. Like with the research base that Lorna and the others had destroyed, there had been no news on it at all, not even in government departments. The experiments at the research base could only be described as inhumane. Sentinel Services didn't dare put the research base under the military or government, or they would have to report their losses as per standard procedure. At that time, it wouldn't be the people who would make trouble for them first, but the military and the government. The big shots who supported Sentinel Services would very easily be caught and held against them. Thus, Luke wasn't scared of pissing off the real authorities at all. If everybody was playing dirty, then it was a matter of who had more money. But Luke's goal was destruction, not research. Destroying the organization would cost far less. When things blew up, the other party would definitely suffer more than he did. Luke had never been passive when it came to protecting people. By protecting these superhumans, he could obtain more abilities more quickly. Secondly, Sentinel Services itself was a huge amount of experience and credit points. As long as Luke was willing, this organization would be visited one after another by superhumans who loved peace. Superheroes like Batman, v. Daredevil and Big Dipper would definitely come knocking. With the care and concern of these peace-loving heroes, the question was how long Sentinel services could last. As they chatted and pondered, Luke's car returned to Manhattan. After parking the car, Carol carried Lorna on her back, and Luke carried the bald commander as they entered a dark alley. He then opened a manhole cover and went down. Carol couldn't quite take the smell of the sewers, but Luke had already taken out a spray can from his backpack to eliminate the smell. Carrying the other two on their backs, they walked through the sewers for another 20 minutes before they returned to the surface. After eliminating the smell with the spray again, they entered an apartment building on the side. Without his inventory, Luke could only pick the lock to get into the safe house. After examining the bald commander for a moment and seeing that he was about to wake up, Luke took out an anesthetic syringe from his backpack. Carol had put Lorna down on the bed, and she watched Luke uneasily from the bedroom door. She was amazed by how professional he was. Luke gestured for her to sit down before he said to her in a low voice, "This place won't draw any attention, but it's not very safe. You and Lorna have to be careful. Don't answer the door. The residents here aren't familiar with each other. There's enough food in the fridge. Stay here for 2 days, and I'll come get you after that." As he spoke, he took out a titanium phone. "Don't call anyone. If anything happens, use the website to leave a message. There's an explanation for how to do that on the phone. See for yourself." Carol accepted the phone that Luke gave her. Watching him pick up the bald commander again, she couldn't help but ask, "Are you going to kill him?" Luke chuckled. "No, he's more useful in one piece. This is nothing for you to worry about. When you have time, think about what you want your life to be like in the future. Your partner should do the same. A beautiful new life is waiting for you." Carol nodded blankly. Oh. Was this that new life? She had almost been captured just now. After he left, Luke entered the sewers again and walked a few rounds before he came out on one side of an old warehouse. He brought the bald commander inside and used various abilities along with the inducer to try and dig out information on Sentinel services from the guy. Compared with saving Carol, this was his real reward for the night. According to Carol, Sentinel services had more than one research base for experimenting on superhumans. As long as he found one of these research bases, he would make a fortune. Listening to the intelligence that the bald commander gave him, Luke was delighted. The next few days were peaceful. It wasn't just New York, there wasn't any activity in New Jersey either. That bunch from Sentinel services were taken away as quietly as they had arrived, the local police had no idea. After an hour of interrogation, Luke dropped the bald commander off at the supermarket in New Jersey. Wearing nothing but his underwear, the bald commander was taken away by a patrol car. The officers thought that he was some unlucky B***start who had been robbed and left with nothing but the clothes on his back. A bunch of suspicious-looking people then started skulking around this supermarket in New Jersey. However, Luke had already used his ability to make the two waitresses in the fast food restaurant overlook the memory of him chatting with Carol and Lorna, so their investigation turned up nothing. The next night, Luke went to the safe house in his typical gray hoodie. This time, Lorna, who had almost been caught, had a much better temper. It could be because she had gotten a fright, or because of the mite of 10 million as a rescue fee. Without much hesitation, she decided to follow Carol and live a beautiful new life. After casually asking for their opinions, Luke chose 2 new faces for them. Carol didn't ask for much with the new face. At the very least, she felt that it was much more beautiful than the original, and she could totally accept it. Lorna was slightly conflicted, her new face was much worse than her actual appearance. Few women wanted to be ugly. In response, Luke told her that she couldn't be too pretty if she wanted to hide, or she would draw attention wherever she went, increasing the chance of an accident happening. After being caught just once, Lorna, who still had lingering fear, accepted this reality. Compared with being beautiful and captured, she finally chose to live a less beautiful but safe life. Luke also said that his method could be cancelled and wouldn't affect her original appearance. They had chosen their new faces, and it would only take Luke a moment to make them. For a basic single-face mask, Luke only needed to input a model of the face into the blank mask. It was basically like an assembly line, and just cost a little bit of material. On the third night, Luke gave them the masks, and they successfully changed faces. He didn't reveal the 1,000 faces system, but first used his ability to put the two girls to sleep before he put the masks on them. As long as no one saw it with their own eyes, this face-changing ability could be a superpower, a high-tech ability, or even a combination of the two. The main thing was that Carol and Lorna were too weak to protect themselves, and were targets of Sentinel services. It would be troublesome if they were caught again. After this incident, the system modification was finally completed. In total, it had taken over 8 days. Luke wasn't in a hurry to check the changes in the system. Instead, he added a point to dexterity first and made it 22. Then, he chose to modify the inventory again with Sloane's evil thoughts. While the inventory was being modified, he checked the system. According to the previous notification, the Loom of Fate had been used to modify the system interface. Luke had actually asked the system to change the way information was displayed, so the modification this time should include an update in this area. A moment later, Luke found something new in his teammates' panel. There was now a tag after each name. There were 3 types: good, neutral, and evil. Good was green, neutral was yellow, and evil was red. Each color was also further split into 3 shades. After mulling for a moment, Luke started pestering the system. As if familiar with his character by now, the system quickly sent out a new panel to display the new information. The new panels were still divided into good, neutral and evil, with colors ranging from dark to light. Luke took a look and saw that Selena's name was a dark green. Was forgiveness part of being good? But Breaker wasn't exactly a magnanimous person. Well, it was true that she hadn't killed many people. With most of them, she just broke a few bones before forgiving them, which was much better than Luke. Thinking that, he couldn't help but pester the system. What color am I? He was just being cheeky, he actually knew that his name wasn't on the list. However, the system responded, and it instantly flashed back to the character panel. The name, Luke, glowed with a dark golden light. His mouth dropped open. Is this, yellow? Or some mutant color? Naturally, the system didn't react to his nonsense. However, Luke had the faint feeling that the dark gold color wasn't neutral yellow, but had some other meaning. But he didn't waste time dwelling on it. He had to take things step by step. He could figure out later why his name was so dark yellow it was almost black. Luke looked at the neutral panel again, and saw that there were all kinds of people. Most of the people he knew were on it, including Tony Stark and Frank. The dark red names on the evil panel were also familiar. Like Bullseye, gang leaders whom he had run into but had been detained by other people, murderers, and so on. The one thing they had in common was that they had all done a lot of bad things. After testing and mulling it over, Luke roughly understood the purpose of this panel. For people he came into close contact with, he could now use the system to check how good or evil they were. At first glance, it seemed that the system modification this time hadn't directly improved his combat ability. However, Luke was laughing wildly in his heart. D*MN, Daddy system had relaxed restrictions further. It was obvious that it was very satisfied with how diligently Luke had been harvesting points. In the past, he had to go through a lot of trouble in each operation to check the files and find evidence to confirm if a target was guilty and deserved to be punished, so as to avoid wrongly killing innocent people or undercover agents. Now, he would no longer have this problem. As long as he checked the system before every operation, and as long as the target was deemed evil, he could act first and didn't have to worry about accidental harm. This new modification wouldn't make a difference when it came to repeat offenders, since it would be easy to find conclusive evidence of their crimes. However, it was impossible for Luke to be certain of all his colleagues in the police department, the FBI agents, and even strangers in an emergency. This judgment system would come in handy in moments like that. Take District Attorney Reyes, for example. He wouldn't need to gather intelligence on her, he would just have to come into contact with her once to determine how to deal with her. Secondly, this function was useful in solving cases, but it didn't really have an effect on him. After all, even if the other party was evil, it might not necessarily be because of the case Luke was investigating. In the end, evidence was still required by law. There were many instances where detectives knew that there was something wrong with suspects, but without proof, they couldn't bring them to justice. Thus, the ability to differentiate between good and evil was more in line with his identity as a vigilante. Lastly, the system's ability to differentiate between good and evil could be used as a reference point. That way, Luke would be able to figure out the system's reward and punishment mechanism, and wouldn't need to rely on speculation like before. After indulging in his happiness, he collected his thoughts and studied the rules of this judgment system. An hour later, the modification of the inventory was completed. After testing it for a moment, the efficiency of assembling and dismantling items in his inventory hadn't changed much. It was probably because Sloane's bundle of evil thoughts wasn't worth much, but it was better than nothing. Cursing this guy for being a piece of trash, Luke took out his V outfit and left through the underground passage. The system had been dormant for 8 days, and all his important items were basically stored in his inventory, so he couldn't use his aliases. Now, he was finally able to go out again. In the New Jersey training base, Stacy and the other two had just finished their combat training and showered. They were watching TV on the couch. An MV was playing on TV, with a female singer called Pink who wore a red and blue wig which covered her face so that only her mouth could be seen. Stacy snorted disdainfully. What a pretender. Although she didn't deny that this new singer's song was nice, she didn't like how the singer acted all mysterious with the wig covering her face. Stephanie, who was sitting not far away, smiled lightly. It's a pretty good gimmick though. You now remember her, right? Artemis interjected, have you chosen the style for your debut? Stephanie shook her head. My face hasn't arrived yet, how can I come up with anything? I can't cover my face like that, right? The three women looked at each other in bewilderment. Artemis broke the awkward atmosphere. What's that V doing? He hasn't been here in so many days. Stacy frowned. Art, have you forgotten the safety rules again? Don't mention that name. Artemis shut up. Stephanie changed the subject and helped her sister out. Our living expenses have never been cut off, and I've already perfected my debut song. It's not like that person has nothing to do. There's no need for him to trick us. Maybe, he's too busy. The three girls fell silent again. The MV for the female singer was over, and a new show started playing. A gentle female voice suddenly rang out. The wizard will arrive in 3 minutes. Please be ready. Hearing that, the three girls were stunned, before they quickly went to their rooms and changed. 3 minutes later, the door opened and closed silently. The three women who were watching attentively were shocked, and stood together warily. Stephanie was ready to roar. The next moment, blue light flashed, and a figure in a black cape appeared at the door. Looking at the three dumbfounded women, he unhurriedly took off his Zorro hat and bowed. It was just a little magic show. Don't mind it. Stacy was the first to come back to her senses. She couldn't help but ask, why didn't you knock on the door when you came in? Luke walked into the living room and sat down in an armchair. I've stirred up a bit of trouble recently. I don't want to get you involved, so I didn't want to make an appearance outside. Stacy asked, what kind of trouble? Luke chuckled. I killed some assassins who wanted to take the bounty that's on my head. Although they've stopped for the time being, the 2 million bounty is still there, and there'll be some who won't give up. The three women. They didn't feel like he was bragging. After all, this guy really made people hate him. After saying that, the three girls relaxed, and they very consciously sat down opposite him. Luke looked at them. Are you ready? Your brand new life is about to start. The three girls nodded. Luke said, then take a nap. When you wake up, you'll be different people. As soon as he said the words, the expressions of the three girls turned sluggish, and they slowly closed their eyes. Luke took out 3,000 faces masks and matching nanogloves, which he put on them. Then, he walked over to Stacy and spoke in a low voice. Stacy's split personality disorder was a hidden danger. Luke hadn't had many solutions before, but elementary pheromone control had given him a lot of space to operate in. This ability could compel a person to carry out an order, but would gradually become useless over time. However, he could use it on Stacy every once in a while to control the emergence of the other personalities. Thankfully, Stacy never turned into someone else for long, and it hadn't happened in recent months. It seemed that elementary pheromone control was very effective. After he was done treating Stacy, only 20 minutes had passed. Luke snapped his fingers. Wake up. The three girls opened their eyes at the same time. They were blank for a moment, before they realized that they were lying on the couch. Luke coughed lightly to draw their attention, and said, Okay, let's see if you're happy with your new faces. In any case, they won't change even if you're not happy, he murmured inwardly. The three girls looked at each other and couldn't help but cry out as they took steps back. They were even more surprised after that. My voice. Luke asked, How do you feel? Satisfied? He had only added the voice-changing function to the 1,000 Faces system recently. Previously, he had always relied on his suit's supporting voice-changing system. Now, part of the nanomaterial for the 1,000 Faces mask would directly change the user's voice to ensure that it was completely different from the original. For now, it only had one fixed voice to match the one face in the mask. Stephanie's ability was elementary sound wave. Thanks to Luke's guidance, she actually didn't need this voice-changing function. For safety reasons, however, her mask still had this function, to prevent her from accidentally exposing herself. Also, since Stacy's elementary replication could transform her into someone else at the genetic level, the 1,000 Faces system definitely wasn't that awesome. However, the side effects of her elementary replication were too severe. The more frequently she used it, the more severe her psychological issues became. So, she had a copy of the mask too. The three girls were shocked for a long while. After examining and speaking to each other, they even had the AI program Butterfly project their complete images. After almost 10 minutes, they finally remembered the guy who was watching the show. Crossing his arms, Luke leaned back leisurely on the couch. The three girls' behavior was completely normal. He had also had fun like this when he first created the 1,000 Faces, there was nothing to be embarrassed about. However, their new faces were 50 to 60% similar to their real faces. This way, they wouldn't be too resistant to their new faces, but people also wouldn't make the connection to their original faces. Seeing the three girls sit down in embarrassment, he coughed and took out a stack of documents. Here are your new identities. Sign these contracts and report to the company tomorrow. Artemis had an expectant look on her face. Can I be a star too? Luke stared at her for a moment before he said, based on the results of the training, you're not good at dancing, singing, or acting. I don't think you can become a star. The three women. The victim was devastated, but the other two girls couldn't comfort her. It was fine if she didn't have the chance, but if she didn't have the ability, how were they going to comfort her? They hadn't played around during the wizard's training in the last few months, yet Artemis hadn't produced any results, so what could they do? Full of despair, this twin sister lowered her head and looked at her contract. Assistant? Luke nodded. You won't be relying on this small amount of pay to make a living. When you become an assistant, your horizons will expand. Who knows when you'll find the career that's right for you. It could be painting, musical instruments, or sports. These people can all be celebrities too. You can give it a try. Artemis's eyes lit up. That's right. I can do other things. It doesn't have to be acting or singing. Luke was silent. That was right. If there really was nothing she could do, she could become a mukbang or makeup live streamer online. Who knew, she might really become famous. He wasn't joking. After all, titanium phones were already widespread, and 3 other cell phone companies had released their own smartphones in the first half of the year. This world was slightly more technologically advanced than in his previous life. Coupled with the butterfly effect which Luke had created, it would only take 2 years for a website similar to YouTube to be created. She would definitely become an internet celebrity. While she wouldn't be a genuine celebrity, she would be very close to one, which should satisfy Artemis's craving to be a star. Seeing the contract, Stacy was stunned. I can be a singer too. Luke nodded. Sing some cover songs first. We can follow Shira's footsteps. Stacy had better stamina, coordination, and reflexes than ordinary people. In fact, she was more suited to be a special agent, assassin, pro fighter, and so on. But that was something that could be shelved for the future. For now, it was fine for her to just be a minor celebrity. Stacy squirmed uneasily. Can I really? Luke said, you're not short of money. What's wrong with trying a new life? The 3 women. Fine, anyone with money could be willful. People with even more money, could be even more willful. If the wizard, who was their angel benefactor, didn't feel regret, what else could they say? They would report to the record company separately tomorrow and get to know each other again as if they were strangers. Luke had specifically warned them not to get too close in a hurry. After a while, Stacy and Stephanie could go out as contracted singers, and Artemis would become a regular assistant no matter who she followed. It would be best for them to put on this show for the outside world for at least a few months, if not for a year. After that, he stood up. Good luck, girls. I have high hopes for you. Seeing him reach the door, Stacy couldn't help but say, wait a minute. Luke turned around. Do you have any more questions? Stacy asked, well, is there really nothing else you need us to do? Luke thought for a moment, and a coin suddenly appeared in his hand. I almost forgot. Come, girls, let me test your luck for your new lives. The 3 women were all stunned. Half an hour later, Luke walked to the door and disappeared again in a flash of blue light. The 3 girls in the room were silent for a moment before they looked at each other. Artemis couldn't help but swallow. This little magic trick really does make him look like a wizard. Stacy said, he's been a wizard since the beginning. Isn't it normal for him to know some magic? Stephanie reminded them in a low voice, well, should we discuss what to look out for at the company tomorrow? I'm afraid that Art might have forgotten. Artemis was angry. Nonsense, I remember very well. I got more than 80 points on Butterfly's questions. Stacy said darkly, real life isn't an exam. One mistake and there might be no turning back. Artemis was silent for a moment. Fine, let's review what we should pay attention to. On the way home, Luke was in a good mood. Just now, he had used a coin toss to adjust the number of times he had won against the 3 women. Stephanie had been using elementary sound wave for a few months, and it had long become his own ability, while Artemis's energy explosion had always been unavailable. The twins had better mental states, and didn't need to be scared with a curse. Stacy's elementary replication was still unavailable, but a net victory was enough to meet the requirement. That way, Stacy would be a little unlucky at most, which wasn't a big problem. On the other side, Carol and Lorna had gotten a fright. Luke would give them some time to adjust before they started work. At the same time, he would be able to stagger when the 3+2 teams reported for duty. With regards to their abilities, Luke only found an opportunity to play one round with them, and lost. Carol had made some progress with her elementary self-healing, but Luke's own elementary self-healing had pulled ahead, so he couldn't use her ability. Lorna's ability, on the other hand, was elementary magnetic control. Seeing this ability, he was conflicted, but could only give up with a bitter smile. It was unavailable, which wasn't unexpected. Garcia, the gang boss whom Luke had helped Bloodmint take down, had been able to control small metal blades, and his magnetic control was also unavailable. Lorna's ability was a lot stronger, she could control metal table knives and was very fast. It was inevitable that Luke wouldn't be able to learn this skill. He could only rely on Sentinel services. While he couldn't learn magic abilities, he could at least get something to reinforce his physique. Besides, elementary sound wave was an ability that was actually a little similar to magic. There might still be a chance he could learn magic. Looking forward to it, he waited for the investigation to be completed. Sentinel Services, this secret organization, could only be considered a small mouse. At the slightest sound, it would be scared into hiding and wouldn't appear for a long time. He didn't have the time or energy to keep monitoring it. He would take it down in one clean swoop, earn as much as he could from this job and obtain the bulk of its value first. So, he would only take action when he had enough information and confidence. Luke's days were peaceful, but New York gradually turned noisy. Tony Stark had finally officially settled down in New York. Financial reporters and media journalists, as well as the paparazzi, swarmed this newsmaker like flies. The paparazzi were the most excited. This tycoon hadn't canoodled with any sort of cover girl over the last few months. He holed himself up in his place every day, turning into a shut-in. This wasn't in keeping with Stark's character at all. Not to mention that this tycoon was the first superhero, Iron Man, to reveal his real identity on TV. Was a cover girl favored by Iron Man the same as a cover girl favored by a playboy? Of course not. Look at Shira, who had only been suspected of having a thing with Batman. She skyrocketed and became a superstar. So what if Tony was a Stark or Iron Man? If he didn't make a splash in the news, he was nothing. Everybody was waiting to see who would be the first woman to win over Iron Man. She would definitely receive the same treatment and become a media darling. Because of that, countless women were doing all they could, including but not limited to stars, media presenters, socialites, upper-class ladies, gay guys and so on. Unfortunately, the paparazzi, beautiful ladies and gay guys were disappointed. Tony had been busy studying the Iron Man armor every day for the last few months. Apart from a few public appearances, the only person he made eyes at was Pepper, the CEO's PA. Pepper had been busy non-stop with buying back Stark Industries shares, cleaning up Obadiah's minions, changing the direction of the company's development, and overseeing the relocation. She was so busy that even the tycoon's meaningful looks just passed her by. Of course, Pepper herself was still hesitant to get into a relationship. If they didn't start a relationship, she could still continue being his assistant. Once they started, Tony's attitude of changing women like he was changing clothes would be a big problem. Once their relationship ended, there would no longer be any reason for her to stay by his side, so she could only leave. The biggest problem between a man and a woman was the imbalance in feelings. Although Pepper deliberately avoided talking to Tony, the tycoon wasn't discouraged. He had a lot of things to do. At that moment, in the night sky above Flushing, New York, the back of a carrier plane slowly opened. A gold and red Mark IV took a running leap out of the carrier plane, and amidst the countless explosions of fireworks, it charged down from the sky and landed on the stage in a handsome and classic pose, one knee and hand down on the ground. A large group of beautiful women with blue and white LED lights on their chests poured out from the back, and they started to sing and dance to the song, Shoot to Thrill. Tony stood up and spread his hands in a gesture of welcome. The stage opened up, and 4 mechanical arms rose up to quickly take off the armor. The tycoon's hair wasn't messy at all, and his beard was neatly trimmed. His lips curled up into a charming smile. In the huge venue below the stage, countless people jumped and yelled, "Iron Man, I love you. Tony, I love you." Luke and Selena were eating dinner as they watched the news. Selena sighed. "Look at this flashy person. Why can we only use the armor's stealth function when we go out?" Luke said, "I forgot to tell you that many people in Congress feel that the Iron Man suit is a great weapon that can threaten the stability of society. The military committee is preparing to summon Tony, and want him to hand over the Iron Man suit." Selena exclaimed, "Seriously? He's the top dog of Stark Industries. Those people can't touch him, right?" Luke put down his empty plate and took a sip of his guarana. If it were any other ordinary person, they wouldn't have gotten the Senate to issue a summons, but would have directly sent troops to besiege him and confiscate the armor. "If it were you, would you kill the soldiers who were ordered to come, or would you run away?" Selena snorted and chewed on a piece of char siu. "I would choose to use the stealth function." Luke patted her head with a smile to comfort her. "Good girl." Selena turned her head unhappily and avoided Luke's paw. She looked at him disdainfully. "Don't think I don't know that you frequently praise Dollar like this." On the live broadcast, Tony was giving his speech. "I'm not saying that this current period of world peace is because of me. I'm also not saying that nobody has been reborn from the ashes like me. Because I'm always in peak condition, and no one dares to go toe-to-toe with me." Selena glanced at a certain someone on the side. "No one dares to go toe-to-toe with him. Has this young master gotten a little cocky recently?" Luke raised the juice and took another gulp, before he shrugged. "He's Iron Man, he's awesome. I have to give him that." Selena chuckled. Hee hee. In fact, the tycoon was even cockier than Selena had imagined. 2 days later, she watched the news broadcast of the hearing in D.C. She watched Tony say matter-of-factly, "I think it's a high-tech prosthetic. That's the best description I can think of." Selena couldn't help but glance at Luke. She felt that the ability of the guy on TV to lie through his teeth was a little familiar. Luke nodded in agreement. "That's right. He's almost 40, and he has such a big hole in his chest. He's indeed a little handicapped." Selena asked, "Are you sure?" On TV, Tony continued to argue with Senator Stern, who was in charge of the hearing. "I'm Iron Man. I'm one with the suit. Turning the suit over would be the same as turning myself over, which would be considered indentured labor or prostitution, depending on what state you're in." Everybody roared with laughter. A discomfited expression crossed Senator Stern's face. "Listen, I'm no expert." Tony quickly interjected, "In prostitution?" "Of course not. You're a senator, come on." Selena was lost for words. At that moment, she felt that Luke was still far from being as arrogant as this young master. Luke took a big sip of his coffee. This is what it means to feel refreshed. One of the things that depressed people most was being verbally flayed by Tony publicly. Anybody would be completely crushed in front of Tony, who was rich and powerful, and so thick-skinned he didn't feel any embarrassment. The most tragic were the big shots who were so sure of themselves. They were flayed by the tycoon's pointed and harsh words. It was simply a slap to the face. Luke now had to add, "The most delightful thing in the world is watching Tony talk rings around big shots." For example, Stern's face was a little red, like a balloon that was slowly swelling up. It was an extremely cozy scene. After living in this country for so many years, Luke's worldview had also been affected. There were few good guys in the bureaucratic system. At least, the person in front of him definitely wasn't one of them. This was the open consensus among the people at the bottom. Seeing how the tycoon attacked Stern until the latter's face turned red, the people in front of their TVs had to be applauding and celebrating. Whether it was super magnate Tony Stark or superhero Iron Man, they were both popular and loved by the public. As for Senator Stern, who was he? No one knew him, he was just an annoying bureaucrat. In fact, today probably wasn't just a party for the common people. Next to Tony, several people in suits and military uniforms were also smiling. They did nothing to hide their expressions. It was clear that not all the higher-ups agreed with Converse's view on the Iron Man suit. These people were clearly big shots in the military, and might have been sent by the military to back Tony up. Of course, they wouldn't say anything. But just sitting there was a clear indication of their stance. Stark Industries wasn't a weak chicken that was easily manipulated. It was a super-American weapons manufacturer that had been around for decades. Even though Tony Stark had switched trajectories, guns and cannons weren't the only weapons in the world. When it came to things like electronics, telecommunications, artificial intelligence and energy, Stark Industries was still the world's best, and these were things still needed in weapons manufacturing. While Luke was deep in thought, Selena poked his waist curiously. "Hey, this guy isn't Dustin's relative, is he?" "Who?" Luke looked at the TV, only to see a middle-aged man in a suit and glasses speaking and flattering Tony. Selena said, "His name is Justin Hammer, and he's the CEO of Hammer Defenses." His name makes him sound like he could be Dustin's twin brother. "Luke, stop watching TV with Gold Nugget. You may get brain damage." Gold Nugget looked away from the tablet and turned its head with a blank look. Luke said, "It's fine, you can continue watching. In any case, you're brainless." Gold Nugget tilted its head and thought for a moment. It was indeed brainless since it was a symbiotic host. So, it turned around and continued watching its show. News was the most boring. It really didn't know why the Fiend and Selena watched it every day. Criticizing them inwardly, it was quickly engrossed once again in the dragons and monsters in its TV show. On TV, Tony had already hacked into the system in front of everybody and exposed Hammer's dark history. Selena was enlightened. So this is what it means to not think things through. This Justin definitely isn't anywhere near the young master's level. Luke nodded in agreement. Justin wasn't that stupid. Of course, the police system was different from the business world, but Justin wasn't a rash person. Coming to find trouble with the young master with this sort of IQ, it could only be said that Justin was thick-skinned and wasn't afraid of being beaten up. On TV, Tony humiliated Justin Hammer in front of everybody once more before he stood up calmly. He gave the countless cameras 2V signs. "I alone can protect world peace." Most people stood up and applauded. Senator Stern exploded on the spot and cursed into the mic, F***CKU, Stark. F***CKU, you beep beep beep. The news channel decisively cut the sound. In fact, Luke had guessed at the two F***CKUs, from reading Senator Stern's lips, everything had actually been censored. Clearly, Tony had won this farce. On screen, the tycoon said earnestly, "I'm very happy at your absolute trust in me." Luke and Selena both shook their heads. Only the tycoon would dare do something like this. For anyone else, they would just be sitting ducks. After they were done eating, they went to the basement and put on their equipment. Selena had been active recently, with Gold Nugget helping out from the shadows. This was the second round of attacks on various gangs, and the most unforgivable criminals were their priority. The second-generation beast armor had already become a thing of the past. Selena was now wearing third-generation beast armor. While there had been quite some changes to its appearance, it still looked like a black cat. It still had functions like stealth, a scent blocker, and short flight. The only difference was that the helmet had the 1,000 faces system so that a face could be put on generous display. It was actually still part of the facial armor, anyone would be able to tell when they rubbed it, though it was unlikely any of the gangsters had that ability. Furthermore, the face Selena had set was the Halle Berry model Luke had created last time. Luke didn't say anything about that. It was just a fake identity. After using it and throwing it away, he could make another one. Selena had been quite active, and her operation had already extended to the Brooklyn area. Thanks to this professional 3-star teammate, Luke obtained 5,000 experience and credit points in 10 days. This was income which automatically entered the system without him needing to do anything at all. Even though he knew it was a little unconscionable, he couldn't help but feel elated. He had finally trained up this passive hack. They parted ways in the underground passage. Selena headed east to continue beating up people in Brooklyn. Luke, on the other hand, put on his brand new Batman suit and headed southeast to Stark Tower. Activating the invisibility function on the Batman suit version 2.0, it swept through the night sky of Manhattan like a ghost.